Hey, David here with Church of Entropy. Jennifer, appreciate joining me again for what I guess is our fifth stream on coronavirus. And I was looking at that just before we started our previous streams going back to the beginning of March, and then we did one the second, when the shutdown first started happening, to almost 2 months ago. After we had JF and then the last one, and I think we covered the majority of the basic information, what people need to know, and the best of the information I could find out about it that I could share with people. So now 2 months later, the news cycle has basically switched. Like we're ready to talk about new things. There's other things that are more pressing and more important. And so we're going to be opening up. Here in Michigan, I'm going to go through all this data, how we're opening up and the different. But coronavirus did not go away. It's at its biggest numbers ever. I think close to 7 million people infected. The death rate, thousands of people are still dying every day. We're going to look at a lot of these numbers, but there has been global geographic shift from where it's getting bad and where it's getting better. So we'll look at all that data and some of the vaccines and is there going to be a cure? Is there anything we're going to be able to do about it? To economic factors, what are the implications moving forward? And anyone who watches Week in Review regularly, me and Jennifer have talked all sorts of things like dissonance theory and various forms of understandings of quantum science. Today is going to be mostly a consensus among experts and elites, scientists, giving the present state of what's going on, where do we stand. So not too much me and Jennifer's opinion. You're welcome to tune in for a Week in Review, our weekly show on Sundays, where we have interesting philosophical discussions. But tonight, I have a lot of graphical material and PowerPoints. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer to say anything she wants, and then I'm going to enter into screen share.
Thanks, everyone, for joining for this fifth installment of COVID analysis with David and Jen. And looking forward to seeing what David has to present today. I think I agree that the news focus is decidedly shifted. We got a quote from the health expert supports anti-police protests. As public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. Should not be confused with a permissive stance on all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-at-home orders. So, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it does appear that the news has cycled. So, looking forward to seeing what you have for us to sink our teeth into tonight, David.
Okay, so as you can see, these are all PowerPoints. But let's start with some basic numbers and statistics. So I appreciate people tuning in. And so I have a whole bunch of infographics. So you just see here the New York Times. It used to be, is the screen share fine?
I could see it, guessing because it's only taken up about half the total area. That's a bit tough to read, so you might need to zoom in just a little bit. That font appears to be a bit small. I'm not sure how easy that is on Boomer Tech StreamYards, unfortunately. Haven't used it yet.
Yeah, I'll just take my face off of it in a second. But you just see, like, it used to be like the whole front of the New York Times was like coronavirus, all coronavirus. And now it's been, relegated to like a smaller section. It's still covered, not that much material on it, even though it is still a major event. And you will talk about that. We can review a different time, maybe in relation to dissonance theory, in relation to the news moving on. I thought I had, here's this major survey. I'm going to put this in the chat. So this is all these doctors and scientists signing on to say that, God forbid, anti-racist public health response to demonstration against systemic injustice occurring during the pandemic. And, this is going to be a medical opinion that basically white supremacy is a lethal public health issue that predates and contributes to COVID-19. Staying at home, social distance, public masking are effective at minimize, so on and so on. I encourage people to read it, but you can see what's aligned with the mainstream media narrative. They will back up with their attempted scientific claims. If people remember our last video that we did, it's all the way back April 4th, over 2 months ago, and we covered a lot of good material there. So let's see the current state of statistics. Here's in my area, you could see the bell-shaped curve flattening. We're still getting tens of cases every day in the 20s. Deaths, only a handful of deaths. There hasn't even been a death in a few days. In the week before that, the deaths were all below 5. I just look at a few more numbers, but you see how coronavirus hit from the 3 months ago when we first streamed about it to now. Over 1,000 people died in within a few miles of me. 10,000 people affected. Michigan as a state, also interesting. Try to put these in the chat. I got so many tabs up. I got to switch back and forth. But also interesting that they've updated their web pages, so the technology and the computer programming. So, it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about AI, but over how the web page has gotten better. So Michigan now 64,000 cases, almost 6,000 dead. But you can see the daily cases, even though there were still over 100, within the last few days, that the daily case amount is much less. And we're talking about the implication, the amount of total people infected, the amount of people who had died. These kind of leveling off. Demographics, we'll see the things that turned out. Like in Michigan, it actually turned out more women affected than men. So although more men died than women. But they have all this data, drawn down. The African Americans were disproportionately affected. The amount of testing now, testing versus the different type of test, the diagnostic test or the serology, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the percentage of people that are testing positive in the beginning, the majority of people who got tested, God forbid, turned out to have it. And now the majority of people who get tested turn out not to have it. So it's just an interesting update. Here's another graph just to show coronavirus did not go away. Do not think coronavirus went away. In fact, the progression of cases is exponentially straight line increasing, although deaths are not increasing like that. So it could be, this concept of flattening the curve, even if it goes up in a linear fashion, that we'll be able to keep, deaths, God forbid, to just a few thousand a day. And that, so looking at it right now, you're thinking, what's the current state of coronavirus? Is, God forbid, we're looking at a few thousand deaths a day for the foreseeable future. And it appears to be getting worse, even though temporarily it's getting better. And we're going to see, is it likely that it's due to the warmer weather that is decreasing, or the shutdown, these various things that we're going to talk about at length. So here's something I'm going to show again later, is the Millikan Institute. This is really pretty cool. And you can see it's a vaccine tracker. So these are about 400 current vaccines that are being tested in various labs, and you can see that a protein subunit, antibodies, other antivirals, RNA-based vaccine, non-replicating viral replicator, a whole bunch of different varieties of testing. JF for some expert in the subject to understand it. Also includes the funding, which interesting. You see some of these, the UK government, different things. I have to change the size, and then you could even click on one of these various things, and sometimes there's more information or document to link to. So if people are more curious about the current state of vaccines, I'm not going to talk about that. That's not my expertise. But here's a nice link, to see the current state of it. And from my knowledge as of now, like there's some things that are promising, but like no, it's unclear that there will be a vaccine. And most of the experts are warning that vaccine will take at least 12 to 18 months. So that's I was just watching the president of Harvard in an interview with David Rubenstein before Church of Entropy joined me, and Harvard is looking at long-term, like a whole year, the whole next school year is likely to have to be a year that has social distancing and the concerns of coronavirus. And if you look at a map, this is the World Health Organization, but worldwide, the U.S. in the last week got 100,000 more new cases. That we're reopening up and things are getting better, although we still had more than 100,000 new cases last week. The only other country that high is Brazil, but countries that are getting tens of thousands of new cases each week, all over. And look at specific data like Africa, and that appears to have low case numbers, and certain reasons why we're having low case numbers right now is likely that the heat and the sunlight and being outdoors. I didn't link these studies. I didn't link these studies today. I could look them up, or you could probably just Google them if they're important. But there's studies that show about aerosolization. Important studies show that the majority of the spread of coronavirus probably occurs indoors. So people gathering outdoors, like even the protests, how come the protests are okay and they're not social distancing and they're not close to each other, and still say, okay, the being outdoors makes a huge difference. And, wearing masks and being outdoors, especially, but even just being outdoors, it's much less likely to spread than being indoors, which is interesting. And it could be that, sunlight also has bad effects on it. And as it gets warmer and hotter, and coronavirus has not went away, it's probably going to spread all across America at these continual levels. And then possibly when the winter comes and people start going back indoors, unless we keep this lockdown going down, it could be hundreds of millions of people. All the worries and horrible things, God forbid, that we warned about when we first streamed a few months ago, that people were predicting that it could still be like that. So people should have a sense, even though we're opening up, that coronavirus has not been beaten. And most of the uncertainty that we pointed out 2 months ago, that's still uncertain. And so let me hand this over to Jennifer, and then we got a lot of information to present. Maybe see what Jennifer has to say real quick, and then we could look at even some more statistics.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a lot of still getting conflicting reports. I mean, I'm not sure if you heard about I believe it was in Spain, a doctor saying that newly tested people had nowhere near the viral load of a couple months back, and it was like it had disappeared. And then at the same time, you're hearing about subsequent waves of outbreaks in China seem to be taking hold there, and then the numbers just keep on growing. I checked out that diagram you sent me. It does appear the total number of cases basically growing. It seems like it's been going in a straight line since, I think, sometime in May. I don't remember the exact date, but I think you know the one I'm referring to. It hasn't really flattened out, although I think this was the total deaths. So you're saying that the rate of new infections is indeed going down, but obviously total infections is still going up.
No, the rate of infection, the rate of infections increase is going down. The number of infections per day. And let's look at some more data. So can you see this?
Well, I can't really read the text. I'm sorry, but I can see generally the shape of distribution there with multicolors representing, I suppose, various populations, but I can't see the letters, unfortunately.
Okay, so okay, so I'm remove myself the video, so it's just a screen share. Hopefully that will make it a little bit better. And I'm putting these links in the chat. So this is just the London Financial Times, a very good graphic. And so you could see it's divided up per country here. And you could see, so I guess you had the number of daily cases, and the number of new daily cases, at least according to this graph, appears, this is actually deaths, not cases. So the number of daily deaths maxed out at one point at about 4,000 some deaths, but that had been divided. So in the beginning it was China, and now China is just a tiny sliver of the chart, and you had Europe was making a big bulk of it, and then the U.S., and then the U.K., Italy, these various factors, and now where you have a rise in Latin America and different parts of the world. So you see on this chart with the the timeline going back to March, where it was Europe and the Mideast, to where blue is Europe and green is the Mideast, and then the North America starts taking up till it becomes about as big as Europe to bigger than Europe, to now where you have Latin America bigger than possibly Europe and North America put together. So it's just a news factor now. It's changing, and it's possible that God forbid that it'll return. But so as a whole, coronavirus has been increasing. So let's just see a few of these charts where you could see these are trying to include, if you see these charts, these are like the number of deaths, and you have the number of excess deaths and likely to the coronavirus, where you could, and this could be more than the official death toll, maybe directly because the person infected coronavirus or because something related to coronavirus cost them their life, God forbid. But the UK, you're looking at 60,000 deaths in these various charts. So you can look through the Financial Times, but the important thing to say that it's affecting different areas in the globe differently at different times, and we'll see what could we learn from that. What does it mean? So here's the in terms like government responses, and so earlier countries like Italy, to the severity of their government response by getting more darker. So the purple's the most severity to Italy, and so ironically, none of these countries have really went down. 50% is the severity factor. Even Italy, that has been out of the most severe state for over a month now, is still generally in quite a bit of a lockdown. And so it's going to be interesting going forward to say, like, yeah, I mean, we don't know if we're ever getting, God forbid, out of this lockdown, or the experts are saying, like, we're not getting out of this lockdown until there's a vaccine, which unfortunately you're going to see that is the consensus of experts, that we're going to remain in a partial lockdown until a vaccine. And whether that's my or Church of Entropy's opinion, that appears to be the consensus of the elite, and we'll at least explain why that is. So here these just different maps and graphics of these things to get just get a full view of what's going on. Here is interesting data in about nursing homes. This is crazy, just the effect of deaths of coronavirus, COVID-19, and the a mass casualty event, God forbid, that parallel to World War II, at least from American lives. I mean, it's not World War II levels yet, but saying like it may not be over. So here is just nursing homes, and you see that 32,000 senior citizens died in the U.S. inside nursing homes, and you see the numbers. Michigan, where I'm at, which could be due to a bad policy, but thousands of deaths. And if you look at the number of deaths per 1,000 people in New Jersey, 178 out of 1,000. That's basically 18% of all people in nursing homes died because of COVID-19. New Jersey was the worst, but Massachusetts, Connecticut, 12%. Michigan, where I'm at, is probably going to become much worse, because they're underreporting it, but it's probably going to be about 10%. God forbid, coronavirus took the life of 10% of all people in nursing homes across Michigan. Here's some more nice charts. Our world into data. Some of you remember our last streams, like I tried so hard to find good data, but now coronavirus has been around for so long. There's so many different web pages that have really have exceptional graphics. So I'm sure Jennifer, it's kind of exciting from just a lover of math to see all these web pages with like embedded charts and things. But so here's looking at numbers. You could kind of see like flattening of the curves, and the cases in the U.S. right now. So let's look at daily new. So just to get a clear picture of daily new. In the U.S., the number of daily new cases has not really decreased. Plateaued at about 30,000, and we're still in the low 20s. So what we call flattening the curve, which was successful for the purpose of not overwhelming the medical system. But in terms of beating the virus, no, we just flattened the curve, and it's unclear. We might have to flatten the curve for another year, really, which the elite and the experts, basically, that's what they want to see. They want to see low-level lockdown, possibly what we're going to see, like contact tracing and different strategies to limit it. But there'll probably be tens of thousands of new cases in the U.S., God forbid, for maybe even the next year, and it could get into the hundreds of thousands. If you look at other countries, some countries have, looks like they've flattened the curve and it's decreased. Maybe even like New Zealand, it's possibly beat it. You could look at Australia, looks like they've possibly largely beat it. But other countries like India are approaching close to 10,000 cases a day. Brazil, over 20,000 cases a day now. So there's nice graphical data to look at it, and there's also more data here. So I think there's let's look at the testing. So there's more than 5,000. So you would see the U.S. has quite a bit of testing, but countries like Australia, they have 2,000, close to 2,000 tests per confirmed case. As the U.S., we're about 23 per confirmed case. So the countries that are beating it are testing well over 1,000 people for every one person that turns out to have it. The U.S., we're extremely far away from that in other countries, and we'll talk more about how you reopen through testing strategy. Let me see if that gets bigger. You look at the scale of testing in Bahrain, Qatar, Israel to some extent have largely been able to beat the virus through testing, and even Russia, that is getting hit pretty bad, but maybe not as bad as other places, is due to more tests. So it's interesting data for people to consider. The test, although it's not my expertise, here is a whole bunch of more graphs and data. So you see cumulative number of cases. So these are still separating the U.S. cumulative cases. So we see a whole bunch of data. To see U.S. and the Europe as a whole have been running about equal in the number of cases. Make this bigger, but we're gonna go into some slides and present some information. But so just get a whole bunch of data just to see what it's currently looking like in a global look at not to understand coronavirus, just how it's affecting us or whoever on a local level, but as the scientific truth behind it and the global phenomenon that it is. So you see the US right now is almost 30% of the distribution. Brazil is coming to close to 10%, Russia 7%, Spain under 4%, but a huge distribution of countries with tens, hundreds of thousands of cases. So India with 250,000 cases, which is less than 3% of the global total, but that God forbid that could blow up. The UK, 4% of the global total, relatively small population to have 4% of the global total as of now. Spain, till you get to like Russia, almost 500,000 cases. Brazil, 700,000 cases almost. The US, 2 million cases. So just phenomenal, God forbid. So here's the progression of total cases here. You see, no, unfortunately, it's not decreasing, and we'll see. I think I got the new daily cases. So no, the new daily cases. Jennifer, if this is what you're asking about, and there's going to be more charts of it, but no, in a global whole, we have not flattened the global curve, and as of now, the global daily cases on all-time highs at well over 100,000 people for over 10 days now. And, I'm not sure if Jennifer wanted to comment on that, but
well, I was going to say, I'm just wondering, what exactly does it mean to flatten the curve? Is it a point where the rate of change of new cases is negative? Is that what you would define it as? Because it seems to be.
Well, so presumably, if we did nothing, the virus would infect a good percentage of humanity. It might take a few years to. But would have eventually reached hundreds of millions of people. So flattening the curve was to slow its spread and not overwhelm the medical system. I mean, if you look at these curves, you say, okay, because the new cases, I showed charts in the last one, but you had charts that show the capacity of ICUs, intense care facilities and hospitals and beds in hospitals to the maximum number of people that may be infected by COVID that are going to need that medical treatment. So from that perspective, like you're saying, maybe there's nothing we can do about coronavirus, and maybe it's going to eventually get to everybody. Maybe we could flatten the curve till we come up with some sort of treatment or cure, and we're going to have to do this for a year. But as of now, at least we could limit it from overtaking the medical care system, because if it overtakes the medical care system, the number of deaths will vastly increase. So you see here, the number of daily deaths has in fact decreased. So even though the number of daily cases is still increasing, the number of daily deaths is decreasing, which could be multiple reasons why that is, but it's still around 5,000 deaths for well over a month now, and with the number of daily cases continually increasing. Let's see this timeline here of the global growth of it. But you're saying with the global cases increasing, you're not going to expect a drastic decreases in the daily deaths. So that's probably a sign of better care for the people who are getting affected. So you could see here, just huge amounts too, because but if the curve is flattened and we don't go back over 5,000 deaths a day, you could predict out, and we're going to talk about these mathematical models, and we even have slides, and I found interesting things. So we looked at last time Statistica, so this is the latest update on Statistica. Is there any statistics you wanted to see, or have you seen enough?
Well, I think there's still more statistics coming up in the slideshow that you have about the meta-analysis of the various
Okay.
estimation techniques. But yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you want to see the statistic, or should I just skip it?
Well, how much more do you have to go?
This is the last. That's the last one of my, just statistics. I put in there so people who really like statistics, you could look at the statistic of it. Just be more cumulative cases across countries, and because I didn't come on really just to tell you the number of cases infected or something. I thought that was important. Anyone who saw the last week in review, here's a cute little mathematical modeling tool, and funded by Jeffrey Epstein, ironically. And we'll talk about that more in week in review. But this comes from the Evolutionary Dynamics Center at Harvard of Professor Martin. His name's slipping me. I ordered his book, but he had written a book on the mathematically modeling viruses. So it'll be interesting, but we're not going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and who created coronavirus or any of that. But interesting that this mathematical modeling tool is funded by Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm not going to fool around with this today, but I encourage people who are more into the mathematics. This thing has a tutorial. There's the model, if you understand the mathematics of what these various factors that you're changing, and put it into formulas, and it even explains what all the variables are: susceptible individuals, exposed individuals, infected individuals in severity class, the severity of the infection, individuals who have recovered from the disease and are immune, dead individuals, to your total, then your parameters, rates of various rates, different clinical stages, all these things that will fit into a mathematical model. One of those things, that is very important in these modeling is this capacity factor of hospitals. That you're saying, okay, but basically, people are feeling the economic crunch, and God forbid if the experts are right, as we open up, coronavirus cases are going to start increasing again, and people are going to start dying, God forbid, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it. But what the most we could do about it is to flatten the curve with social distancing restrictions enough that we don't overwhelm our healthcare system. So that's one of these key things of these mathematical models and all these variables that could be adjusted, and a lot of these things are unknown because it's a novel coronavirus, so we don't know the duration of mild infections, or we have a lot of data now because God forbid there's millions of infection, but so there's a lot of uncertainty. There's different interventions, like social distancing and things that do it just versus the spread and various factors. So I encourage people to play around with these numbers and see that we're not out of this by any means at all. Here's the Millikan Institute, and I looked at their data. The Millikan Institute has a lot of good data, but this is just about Africa. And we're going to wonder. The experts are predicting that Africa eventually will be hit the worst of any country. But you see now, South Africa, June 6th, South Africa, 43,000 cases. Egypt, 31,000 cases. Nigeria, close to 12,000. Algeria, close to 10,000. Ghana, 9. Morocco, 8. Cameroon, almost 8, Sudan, 5. So we'll look, relatively, those numbers are low, but if they're doubling, look at their averages or play around with the numbers in the various ways that they give you, and if they don't have the means of testing or contact tracing, or they have a worse structured healthcare system, the experts are predicting that the next hotspot could be Africa, although that may not prove to be the case. There could be other factors like sunlight and heat, or amount of time people spent outdoors versus indoors. So you could see the forecasts have consistently been high. Also, interesting, like decrease in oil revenue and startup investment. And so we'll talk more about that. But I think that's the end of my numbers. Here's interesting, a weekly snapshot of the CDC, and we'll look at the Center for the Disease Control guidelines to get the the most current advisory. But they now have a weekly review of this week in coronavirus statistics. So you got key points. Nationally, the percentage of laboratory specimen testing positive with SARS-CoV-2 with molecular assay decreased compared to last week. However, there are two developments in particular worth noting. The percent positivity increased in 4 HHS surveillance regions, and so on and so on. That you're going to see it's going to come to regional tracking and testing. So you see cumulative tests. There's been over 10 million tests now in the U.S. and the various methods of testing. 8 million, 80% of those are in commercial laboratories. So you could see some of these charts like specimen tests, who the age of people tested, the percent positive of the people tested, types of test, whether they're specimen or clinical or commercial. So I'm not sure what all this data is. I didn't have a time to review all this data, but this would be the most recent data, including God forbid, comorbidities, death rates based on comorbidities or pre-existing conditions, and various things. So encourage people to look at this. Here's an interesting thing. It's going to be somewhat related to what we're talking about. This is the Twitter CEO, forgetting his name. You remember offhand the Twitter CEO's name?
Jack Dorsey?
Yeah, Jack Dorsey. So he's had this little spaz with President Trump, but Jack Dorsey has donated close to 30% of his wealth. I think he said 28%, which is $1.6 billion towards COVID relief. And you will see like the direction that the elites want to take to using technology to solve it versus different forms of elite. Saying about Jack Dorsey, the tech elites. So here you say $10 million to core free COVID testing sites in major metropolitan cities. So you're saying, how are we going to beat this through testing? So here, Jack Dorsey, $10 million, in his area, in fact, including in Detroit. So some of the $10 million that Jack Dorsey donated for testing site will go to Detroit. Here's $15 million for the city of San Francisco, recovery fund, food, housing, access, small business, working support. We're not going to talk about the protest or mass movement, but you notice that people's opinion regarding COVID-19 and social distancing and the direction forward from the Silicon Valley tech elites might correspond with their beliefs regarding the protests. So here you see Jack Dorsey putting his money where his mouth is, giving what will be a $1.6 billion. So $10 million, closing the digital divide for 25,000 students in Oakland. Funds will provide laptops and internet to all. So, social distancing, people can't go back to school, but Jack Dorsey, thank God, in Oakland, California, one of the biggest places of the protests, will get 25,000 laptops for people to have remote education. Here's another $10 million grant, direct payment initiatives to various SNAP programs, which is generally assistance to poor people. Another 10 million one Reform Alliance, PPE in every jail and prison. So there's Jack Dorsey, $10 million to get the protective equipment in prisons. So it's just interesting, and you could see this will align with certain social justice things that we'll talk about. We talk about in Week in Review, but we'll save that for Week in Review. But I just thought I'd include that in there because it'll be related to the strategy of the elites for how they think we're going to handle COVID-19, at least in their areas. Do you have anything on that, Jennifer, or maybe we can move into some slideshows?
Yeah, why don't we just move on to the slideshows? I had a chance to look them over. There are some pretty interesting stuff in there.
Okay, yeah, thanks for tuning in because we got 15 people watching. Hi T and El Jim. Any questions or comments? Do it at Duvid because then it will stand out, easier time seeing it. I guess then we even got super chat enabled. If anyone feels like pop in a super chat. So is there one of them that you prepared or that you looked at you want to do first? Or do you want to just start with the smallest ones, knock off the smallest ones first?
Well, the one I was really interested in was the one that demonstrated that the unreliability of the tracking techniques they were using. So I think that's the longer one. So if you want to blow through the shorter ones first, that's fine by me.
Okay, so these are all on SlideShare, so I'll put them in the chat so people could link through. So this one is kind of cute, and is this clear enough for you to read it?
Yep, thanks. I can see that.
So there's just a few pages of implications to organizations, employees adjusting to work from home, split team, widening distance between teams and breaking down the social compact, impact of productivity, balancing between personal and professional priorities, engagement, mental health, well-being, and financial sustainability concerns. I was watching before, Google, Facebook, YouTube. Most of these places think that they're going to be able to successfully operate their business remotely, that they don't even need, they could completely successfully operate all their meetings without actually meeting. So opportunities that will provide, and we're going to look a lot at this is somewhat more business oriented, but accelerate technology adoption. That's what you think from a certain point, like the Jack Dorsey elites, as the opportunity provided will be accelerated technology adoption, more electronic communication, could have environmental benefits, greater comfortable virtual meetings, performance management, hiring restrictions, be differences, so here they got the pages here, challenges on the left and opportunities on the right. So challenges, hiring restrictions were linked to the need to remain financially agile. Companies just, it's a big financial commitment to hire people. So in this amount of uncertainty, people are less likely to hire. Deferral and increment performance review promotion cycles, HR people cost restrictions linked to the need to remain financially agile, delays with international hires, transfer approvals, immigration, the opportunities, greater acceptance of on-demand talent for certain roles and skills, continuous engagement of key talent that need to be retained, increased transparency and communication, stronger linkage between business performance and rewards, a resetting of a more sustainable fixed cost base, stronger linkage between performance and reward at an individual level, cost savings on global mobility and business travel, more creative planning and redeployment of resources, resetting of location strategy for jobs of the future. Did you want to read some of these, or you don't think I could just put the link in the chat if people could read through it on their own?
I don't need to read them unless there's something in particular that you think is relevant or should be paid special attention to. I guess it's pretty, I don't want to say draconian, but it seems like it's pretty protocol-oriented self-segregation it seems like they basically want to enculturate people to this as a long-term thing. One thing I was thinking about the impact of this social distancing on business, it really depends on the nature of the business. At my old job, we hardly ever had meetings. We had to like force ourselves to have a meeting once a month, and half the time we would forget. And I know that some people basically have meetings every day, so it'll certainly expose the nature of a lot of these different industries for how meeting oriented they are. Because I imagine some stuff just really wouldn't work without the face-to-face contact. A lot of industries.
If you could do internet, talk or telephone, whether you need a face-to-face is not necessary. If it's just communication, you don't need to be face-to-face. Say if it's something manufacturer, industrial, or documents requiring signatures or courts or whatever reason, people need to be together. But no, in terms of meetings, that could be completely digitalized.
I think we're going to see that the nature of meetings, the frequency of meetings is going to change. I think there is something that you can't really recreate with a Zoom meeting that the IRL face-to-face situation gives you.
Yeah, we'll see. So I'm just going over now your various opinions among the elites of what's going to happen, and a lot of these are from a business angle because like among the elites, you're generally going to have you're just understanding that they're going to remain elites by making money and retaining power, and that will be the perspective through probably that the larger think tanks and people with the information asymmetry, the people who have the majority of the information about what's going on, also have the incentive structures to increase their power and maintain their power. So a lot of these are just business oriented, and people who watch a week in review know common theme. I say karma as money. Money is representative of karma, which from a theological point of view is probably inaccurate, but for a way of understanding things, they say among the elite, generally yes, karma is money, and you will see in some of these slides that how moving forward it'll be packaged in the capitalistic way or the nature, and maybe that will fail, but as of now, we're just showing this is the best information that would appear to be giving the elites are handing down from their best knowledge. It's possible internally they're exchanging different information. So let's look at global regulatory pathways for COVID-19 therapies and vaccines. So I mentioned I'll look at the Millikan thing again after this. That's actually where I found it from these slides. So we had seen slides like these 2 months ago where I talked about the difference between a vaccine and a therapy, where vaccines are generally, there's different forms of them, but they protect someone from the disease by triggering an immune system to produce antibodies that will fight the pathogen attacking the body, in this case, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Therapies are, you reduce the morbidity, mortality, and effectivity of the virus. So a lot of challenges, I'll put the link in the chat. People would read through them. They're time consuming, expensive. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of possible risk factor, supply chain constraints. So, can the process be accelerated? So here, currently, there's close to 400 solutions to coronavirus being tested. I showed you from the Millikan Institute. I'll put that in the chat again. And so this is where I actually found the link to the Millikan from these slides. You can see on the bottom of the string, this slide. So there's 135 vaccines being tested, 85 treatments, and a whole bunch of different things. And among the vaccines, there's many different types of vaccines, and I've studied quite a bit about this just to understand this, but this is not my expertise, so I'll leave that to other people who understand that better. But as of now, we're early in the process, and you'll see, here you look in the typical traditional timeline for vaccine is actually 10 to 15 years. So, Dr. Fauci or, possibly the elite, so to say, want to get a vaccine out there and put into us in a year to 18 months. But, really the process should take 10 to 15 years. So that's interesting, to look at. I'll put the link in the slides, so people could look up these statistics in the MIT study. So here's special enactions by the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, or Food and Drug Administration. March 6 appropriated $61 million to prepare for coronavirus, including necessary medical countermeasures and vaccines, advanced manufacture of medical products. March 27th, facilitate biological product development against COVID-19. April 17th, accelerating therapeutic interventions, selecting private-public partnerships. The accelerated program, approval of off-label things, various things, saying a lot of people have this disease, who is being given this test, how they're administering. So I'm not going to read all through this stuff. But for the people who are, wondering about how this is going on, this is currently taking place right now. So here is, these slides that are the overview of the vaccine process and the current state of it. And here was, I think, did I close out the Millikan Institute? I put in the chat earlier, but the Millikan Institute that had the current status of all the 400 treatments and vaccines being tested. Okay, so here's another quick one. Here's from McKinsey, and there's actually quite a bit from McKinsey. They got very good stuff. People have seen Duvid. Duvid uses McKinsey quite often. But just one variation of the economic for-profit estimation among consensus of the elites. So interesting, the economic effects of coronavirus. 40% of consumers skipped or partially paid a bill payment over the past month. Saying how bad is this lockdown affecting people? So this is going to be a key point moving forward. What are the economic effects of the lockdown? So you got just raw statistics. Third of consumers with a credit card skipped or partially paid their payment last month. So it's not good. You got a third of consumers with a credit card skipped or partially paid their payment last month. Then you got auto loans up there. And if you're saying the younger people were more likely to miss a payment, so the younger people had the biggest thing. So if you're looking at the older people, okay, they partially paid a credit card payment, no big deal. If you're looking at younger people, completely skipped payment or partially paid is almost like half of the population of younger people. And you look at younger people, mortgage, auto loan, rent, utilities, telecommunications, insurance, big factors. So, more data. Almost half of consumers with a credit card and household income less than $25,000 skipped or partially paid their payment last month. So just here by the amount of money that a person has. So, ironically, you sometimes have I forget the exact term that they use, but like the hump or the S curve, that you see that more people in the 25 to 50,000 range Well, I mean, I guess not. So sometimes, but only partially paid. But so poor people, God forbid, are being hit, very hard in terms of the credit squeeze from this lockdown. So most consumers who have received or expect to receive a government stimulus check plan to use it to pay bills. So they got the payment. So I got mine, thank God. Praise the Lord. And I did not actually have to use my stimulus payment to pay any bills, so thank God. But do you see that 2/3 of people did? And from utilities, credit card, mortgage, telecommunications, insurance, auto loan, and nearly half of consumers report they could live off their current savings for only 4 or fewer months. So how long could you live off of your current savings? Only 1/3 of people could live over a year, and 1/5 to a quarter less than a month. Another quarter, the 3 months after that, a sixth. But over a year, there are actually 1/3 of Americans, thank God, do have enough savings to live for more than a year. So
Duvid, did they happen to have any comparative statistics to the credit card defaults or partial payments pre-COVID? It seems strange to put it there with no comparison.
yeah, I'm not sure actually. I'm sure they do, but I just have this one PowerPoint, so I can't answer that now. You could probably
because I've heard this sort of thing before, like that most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Then, just to be clear, that's not new to COVID, I don't think.
If someone watching wants to do a Google check, just to see what those rates of missing credit card payments were before COVID, to see if they have increased or if they have drastically increased. But the connotation from this would appear to be that these are increasing, although they don't have comparison numbers. But you'll see some of the other presentations do have comparison numbers. So, from this presentation, and I don't know how much they're increasing, but definitely they have increased. So how do people reducing spending to deal with the financial losses? So eliminating things they could live without, postpone spending, reducing wherever they can. So over half of people buying fewer quantities, buying lower cost items. So majority of people have not had to do that. Nearly half of consumers are concerned about job security, though this number has been dropping since March.
I just found something on the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a press release saying pre-COVID-19 data shows total household debt increased in Q1 2020, though growth in non-housing debt slows, which is interesting. So the Federal Reserve Bank of New York said that total household debt increased by $155 billion, or 1.1%, to $14.3 trillion in the first quarter of 2020. So I couldn't find an exact comparison, but that'll put people on the right track, and I'll put it in the chat.
I'm pretty sure that some of these future slideshows have that information. So this is interesting. Job security concerns by industry, that IT is the highest with 71%. And that actually doesn't make sense, because you would think that's probably immigration based, that people are concerned about their IT job because they're concerned about losing their visa. Because you would think that IT is one of the more in-demand ones, than retail, although telecom, manufacture, transportation, banking, only government, even government is pretty concerned. But ironically, government is the least concerned of them. And this is the last one. From this one, 30% of consumers with a credit card or auto loan expect to skip or only partially pay next month. So we need comparison. So people who like McKinsey, you might be able to find their last report to have that data. So here's a whole bunch of McKinsey presentations. Just to time, a lot of these are country by country, but just to see one, let's look at Canada, and I'll try to do this one a little bit quicker, but this one's more public opinion. So most Canadians continue to be unsure or pessimistic about Canada's economic recovery after COVID-19. Unsure, So the majority with about 1/5 optimistic and pessimistic, and that's remained about the same. So it's interesting. Overall sentiment of the general population in Canada, health negatively affected, ability to make financial decisions, you meet, job less secure, incomes negatively impacted, ability to work has been reduced. You can see that there's an element on both sides. The blue of people who strongly agree to the black that strongly disagree. So there's different things. Given the economy and personal finances, I'm very careful how I spend my money. That one. So you're just interesting public. So here's something, household savings. Fewer consumers experience a decline in income, though more consumers experience a decline in savings in recent weeks. So household spending. So you look at these trends on what people and how they're spending their money. Interesting. So here it's more broken down to things like groceries, snacks, and so people are increasing the amount they spend on groceries. They used to eat out less. Food and takeout, decreasing. Restaurants, vast decrease. Jewelry, vast decrease. Accessories, furnishing and appliances. International flights. So this, and McKinsey has this information on all these different countries. Here's it put in graphical form. So they do a very good job at making graphics for this data. So percent of people shopped new website or changed primary grocery store. Not that high, like less than a quarter. Switching brands didn't cause huge interruptions like that. Increase in the amount of cooking, watching movies, home repair, gardening, texting, chatting, messaging, watching video, reading. So concern, which 58%, the biggest concern, extremely concerned about the uncertainty of the duration of the COVID-19 situation. We're going to see that there's good reason to be concerned. People are concerned because there is a lot of uncertainty about the duration. And then the economy is about equal concern, both about 58%, and then overall public health. But there's a lot of concern out there. So Canadians most believe the impact of COVID-19 on their routines will continue to last well beyond 2 months. So he's saying we might be partially reopening, but the experts are predicting that there's going to be limitations on public gatherings till we have a vaccine, which is likely at least a year out. And you could see that in Canada, most people, over 92% of people, have kind of already accepted that reality. Consumers expect to return to physical grocery stores, but reduced many in-person activities. Going to movies, people are predicting decreased international travel, going to mall, domestic travel. Adoption of new digital and low-touch activities, including video chat, telemedicine, online streaming. 44% of people using more video chat, video conferencing, remote learning, various things. So, Canada, almost 50% of people are, switching to streaming. Digital low-touch activities, 3 primary buckets. Works for now, activities necessitated by COVID-19 that are poor substitutes for in-person counterparts and consequently have lower intent to continue, versus accelerated shifts, satisfactory digital replacements for in-person activities and connectivity with growing adoption, and potentially here to stay, new and familiar forms of entertainment and interaction with medium-high intent to continue. So it's interesting. We'll see that what part of what people have been doing during the pandemic will maintain and which parts will go away if the pandemic goes away.
It is absolutely fascinating, isn't it, to watch what's going on in the economic world?
Yeah, so
Sort
here
of,
they have.
it's like the evolutionary process in action.
Yeah, so here they have like potentially here to say TikTok, digital exercise machine, wellness apps, meal kit, various things, accelerated shifts, telemedicine. I'm gonna have a lot more slides on that. Works for now, possibly curbside pickup, restaurants, remote learning, grocery delivery, video conferencing, video chat. The type things that we might immediately go back to in person if COVID goes away. Okay, so top priorities when deciding where to shop: physical distancing, mask and barriers. Okay, so that was interesting. If just the type information that's available, and I said those studies exist for all over the world, and McKinsey puts this stuff out and all other stuff. So people who watch me have seen me cover McKinsey reports quite often. I'm gonna have other reports. So, sure, Jim, anything interesting in the chat, or you do anything to add, Jennifer?
No, not right now. I'm just following what you're talking about. I don't want to get off topic or anything. So.
Okay, yeah, I want to kind of give the mainstream strategy, but show some diversity in opinion, but all kind of mainstream stuff. So here is kind of here's something from Ghana, saying global impact and what are people saying in Africa. So Paula Munu, University of Health and Allied Sciences at Ghana, the immediate midterm and long-term impact COVID-19 on food poverty and nutritional outcomes. So February 25th, first two cases, Egypt and Algeria. So you can see these numbers. I don't have to read through. People could check it. You can see a graphical form. It's probably easier. But Africa, they're more worried about food security. And as I said, many of the experts were predicting that Africa will be the worst hit. And plus you have the globalists and all these concerns we talked about with Gandalf in the past of sustainable development goals, ending hunger by 2025, community spread. Here, I'm not sure the number is 71% of Africans work in informal sector with no financial reserves. Just various reasons why an outbreak in Africa could be more dangerous. And this is mostly text. I guess anyone who's interested could read through that. So were there any of the slides I gave you that, so do you want to, let's do this one that I mentioned to you. It was pretty interesting. And I found this randomly in, just searching for slides, and it took me a little bit, okay, Rainer, thanks for joining. It took me a little bit just to figure out like what it was talking about, but it's pretty interesting. So
Well, David, it's right up your alley. It's a meta-analysis. God forbid.
Yeah, but I mean, it didn't have like a clear explanation for like what was going on. So the slides.
I doubt that the people who wrote this knew very much about AI and machine learning. Well, I'll tell you that.
Oh yeah, it could be. I mean, so this is out of Netherlands, COVID-19 related prediction models for diagnostics and prognostics. And, basically they're going to show that most of the prediction models for COVID-19 were very poor and false. However, there was a selection of them that were quite good, but even those had biases and problems. So, this is, abstract prediction models for diagnostics and prognostics of COVID-19 infection, systemic review, and critical appraisal. To review the critically appraised, published, and preprint reports of predictive models for diagnostic coronavirus disease in patients with suspected infection, for prognosis of patients with COVID-19, and for detecting people in the general population at risk of being admitted to hospital for COVID-19 pneumonia were identified for predicting hospital admissions for pneumonia and other events in the general population. 18 diagnostic models for detecting COVID-19 infection. 13 were machine learning based on computed tomography scans, and 10 prognostic models for predicting mortality risk, progression to severe disease. So it's just an abstract of many papers, but he's saying that there were a ton of papers on modeling the outbreak of COVID-19. So here you have their estimation of hundreds of articles being printed each day. I'm not sure exactly what they mean, preprint, false, or true. They're saying that the majority of these are going to turn out to be false, that of the hundreds of articles being printed each day, that 70, 80, 90% of them are their preprints are false.
Yeah, it might be worth going into what exactly they mean when they say false. So basically, false in this case is looking at some group of data and based on that group of data making predictions about the future. And so when Duvid says false here, what that means is the predictions ended up not lining up with what was observed.
Yeah, so you're saying that most expert scientists in published papers made false predictions. And there's a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of these mathematical regression, maybe machine learning, artificial intelligence, whole bunch of models. So here's interesting, you're saying that general thing for predicting, and we'll see, now that we're entering reopening, and you're saying that you have to monitor people to see if they're infected. So we give a 10-point scale of a person that we suspect will be infected. So, having a pneumonia is 5, close contact is 5, fever 3, age over a certain is 1, added 1, being a male is an added 1, having a temperature is only 1. So, when they test people, whether you have a temperature, and we'll see some of that later, the new technology devices for doing that, really that's only a small chance that a person is actually infected if they do have a temperature. But for the best method, so I guess March 13th, you're looking at all these papers that start getting published, thousands of them, all these different models, and so I guess what they did here is a meta-analysis. They used existing websites and they downloaded COVID-19 related publications, and then they used data extraction tools to try to figure out the different models that they were using. And so from these 5,000 papers, the flow diagram, they had to exclude most of them, 4,700. 10 of them were just like it's junk and didn't have models that were worth that were even eligible. So they only were able to find out of close to 5,000 papers, 200 eligible models. And for the purpose of the study, they included 51, 3 models to identify subjects at risk in the general population, 47 diagnostic models, 34 of those are image studies, and 16 prognostic models, 8 for mortality, 5 for progression to severe critical state, 3 for length of stay. So from the 51 papers describing the development and validation of COVID-19 related prediction models, 45 were preprints, 6 peer-reviewed and published, 32 studies used data from China. 3 models for predicting hospital admission. Okay, so the results here with the AUC is like the area under the curve, which means basically 1 means that it's making 100% correct predictions. If it's more than 50%, it's useful. So hospital admissions models were useful, but accuracy rate 73 to 81%. Diagnostic models 85 to 99% accurate. Diagnostic imaging models from 81 to 99.9% accurate. Prognostic models 85% to 99% accurate. So there were models that were relatively good at making predictions, and some of them possibly extremely good at making predictions well into the 99%. But biased ProBest is a tool to assess the risk of bias and applicability of prediction model studies. explanation, elaborations, the risk of bias, any flaw or shortcoming in the design, conduct, or analysis of primary study that's likely to distort the predictive performance of a model. And they assessed bias on 4 domains: participant, predictors, outcome, analysis. And from that, they determined that half of these had a high risk of bias. And, so basically all of them had an extremely high risk of bias. So they have unclear study designs, age not reported in 22 studies, sex isn't reported in 22 studies, often unclear the intent, moment of use of the model, what and how many predictions were examined, missing data, and sample size. Poor prediction models can make things worse. So pretty interesting. I thought you're just to give the update in the level of uncertainty. So this I'm glad I found this paper and just interesting that you're saying that the majority of experts are wrong. The majority of models have proven to be false, and even the models that have generally done a good job at predicting have a huge amount of bias, and it's questionable how useful those models are. So when I showed you the data and the charts, and you could kind of just look, well, like it's going up, or various things trying to extract some sort of narrative from the data, you could say that generally the best minds in the world have largely failed at this project.
Well, yeah, it sort of reminds me of my old job where we worked with the results of these large-scale AI, essentially machine learning models. And it takes quite a while for the data to converge, i.e. reach a point where you're making reasonable predictions and the addition of new data isn't changing to any significant degree the accuracy of the data. So my guess is they just simply didn't have enough data to make these guesses, these strategic predictions accurately. And also, I don't think we can underestimate the factor of the incentivizing of reporting deaths as coronavirus related through the mechanism of state funding, that a lot of hospitals were getting money based on how many COVID patients they had. So that is a possible incentive for misreporting. Another important thing to look at is the comorbidity. So whether these deaths are reasonably attributable to coronavirus, or if it was perhaps some underlying comorbid condition. And comorbidity means multiple illnesses at once, or multiple things at once.
Yeah, so it's going to be important moving forward, and you'll see a lot of these plans moving forward are going to take in how the politicians will call it, protecting their most vulnerable, the elderly or the weak, but that will likely mean isolating them and excluding them from public events, and being careful in their presence. But that's the way it's kind of put in terms of the politicians or the people that are selling this as the method going forward, protecting the most vulnerable, and the essential workers, non-essential workers. So we've been at this an hour 15 minutes. We finished about half of it. Got a lot of information out there, and I really have a lot more good information. So was there any of them you wanted to do, or should I just keep on pounding away?
Oh, no, you can go ahead. That was the only one I was really interested in, and I guess we got to all the points in it already, so we can keep going with the others.
Okay, so re-enter screen share. And so here's an interesting one on the impact of giving, and it's also this one has a kind of a positive message to it. And let me put this in the chat for anybody who wants to follow along and or get in detail to be able to see all this up clear. So this one, there's a lot of reading. I think it's actually just a report. So how has COVID-19 impacted individual giving? February 2020, the impact COVID-19 would have on life in the UK was becoming evident. I guess this is a think tank advisory firm from the UK. And, so people were predicting a huge 48% loss in charitable income, whilst they reported the need for charitable services increasing by 43%. That was the prediction as the pandemic started. But you're going to see that people really ended up giving much more. So a quick overview, there's been 25% increase in actual versus predicted responses to cash campaigns as emergency appeals land. People gave 25% more than predicted. Emergency appeals are outperforming forecast expectations by 40%. Is a 286% increase in the percentage of online responses compared to the previous year. 28% increase in the use of credit cards for giving donations. Charity inbound call volumes have seen a 45% increase. So you see that COVID-19 has caused people to become more charitable. So interesting. Would you have predicted that?
I think charitability all depends on, or to some extent depends on how much disposable income people have. So yeah, it is a bit surprising because you'd expect people's disposable income to go down. There was all this market chaos, but perhaps the government handouts has led to some degree of charitability.
No, I'm not sure if it's because of the government. I think saying no, factually, people's income did go down. However, even though people's income is going down, they're giving more charity anyways.
I guess it's one of those counterintuitive things.
Look,
I mean,
there's a positive side to humanity. Who would have guessed? No one expected
that poverty made people charitable. I guess it's like you can relate to people more. So you want to help them because you want to help yourself, I guess. And if you're ultra rich, you relate to people less, so you're less charitable. Maybe that's the logic of it. Because why are people driven to be charitable? It's because they essentially identify someone else with themselves.
Yeah, an aversion to suffering. So suffering is increased. So generally you're saying, okay, I like my money and, I hate to see people suffering, but they're not suffering that bad that I'm going to part with my money over. But now you say, okay, people are suffering. You say, oh man, it hurts to see people suffering. So I'm more likely to part with my money, even though the amount of money I have might be less than normal just because, the suffering has increased. So I mean, that would be my simple explanation. But yeah, I wanted to throw that in there. I thought that was a good little tidbit in here. So here's another interesting one on event making. So I'm going to show some of the technology soon, artificial intelligence and robotics. So people who follow Duvid regularly, and hopefully tomorrow we can review. We talk a little bit about streaming dynamics and different crowds, because I do go to these trade shows and conventions sometimes and stream them and like to see the latest updates in technology. So here's another consulting group, Pico, that generally has things in consulting for pay, so that the advice presumably is going to increase the financial bottom line of whoever's taking the advice. So things are changing. 25% of clients engaged highlighting that they have canceled all of their immediate marketing activity and budgets. So which of the following have been postponed or canceled as a result? Trade shows. I don't know if it's 75% or 75 is the number. But that's the biggest, so I go to trade shows, those have all been done, canceled. Conventions, no social distancing in those. You can't have a social distancing trade show. Face-to-face sales meetings, partner meetings, sales conferences, sponsorship activities, all marketing activity, product launches. So what can you do? You could rethink the channel. You could reframe the experience. And here, this think tank advisory firm identified 2 core trends. So an acute shift to digital, which we're going to see on obviously online events, digital marketing, social media. Here's some beautiful charts that unfortunately not that clear to read, but before and after. Before is on the left and after on the right. So offline events are probably going to be more digital. Like we might be going through this for a while. So seeing that there's going to be as long as COVID-19, it's going to be less and less offline events, more and more online events. And, I don't know exactly how they worked out these percentages, but it's pretty cool that they did. Marketers are planning to sustain the edge, looking to increase strategic efforts or investments over the next 6 months in virtual and online events. Over 50% of companies are investing in the digital social media content, virtual showrooms. 30% of companies investing in virtual showrooms, virtual remote meetings, live broadcasts, market automation. So pretty interesting how businesses are adapting. So reframing the sense of experiment. The acute shift to digital does not mean that the target audience expectations are any lower. If anything, in the experience economy, they are higher. So how are people reframing the sense of experience in virtual online events and formats? So they're leveraging mixed reality with digital experiences to make broadcast and digital interactions less static, making the engagement more human with personal touches such as mailed invitations, merchandise, and home-delivered food and coffee, sense of place through logged-in states that give unique access to content and interactions, encouraging engagement through gamified interactions. So I'm not going to read through all these broadcast approaches, programming, time, engagement, integration of technology. It's going to be a big issue, especially from the more business side, professional, industrial side, social media, email. Offline events will still be important. So our clients, 37% have had some previous experience with virtual event technology. 64% felt equipped and confident to use current virtual event technology. Okay, so it's interesting just how the business community is being advised moving forward about holding events. And I don't know if you have any comment on virtual events.
Oh, just to say that it'll be very interesting going forward to see where it all ends up and how they're going to deal with the problem of their meetings getting hacked sometimes. I mean, that's a big issue for a competitive edge. If there's always a risk that because your meeting can be so easily recorded.
Just like facilities need security, internet technology will need security, and we'll talk more about that week in review. Kind of, the connection between this and the mass protests, and the direction of the technological elite. So let's look at FinTech, financial technology, and this is coming from Belgium. Post-COVID financial coronavirus challenge. Kind of get global view of different presentations, how people are solving this around the world. Just to get most of these are coming from universities or think tanks. So say the view from the top, view from the throne, but the view from the throne from around the world. So I'll put this in the chat for anyone who may have heard of these people or want to give credit to them. Oh, Claire, thanks for joining. Okay, Reinhard, appreciate your vote of confidence. Okay, so how bad is it? So you're looking at unemployment, job losses, measurement taking, in Belgium for liquidity and solvability. So these are more kind of in-depth financial stuff. But you're looking at the paths to recovery. Saying we went down because of coronavirus, and now we're looking to reopen the economy. So okay, that's why I wanted to demonstrate. The elite projected that we're not going to be coronavirus. We're just going to flatten the curve enough that we're not going to overwhelm our health system. But now that we've flattened the curve, even though we haven't beaten coronavirus and there might be a steady, God forbid, death rate of thousands of people a day, we could still get the economy back and running. And there's even some scenarios where the economy, at least in terms of productivity, in terms of wealth distribution or economic models like capitalism, communism, whatever, will have different outcomes. But in terms of just productivity, that some people actually think we will be more productive after, due to the rapid implementation of technology that this pandemic might cause. So here's like a stress test model. So you're looking here, where we're in June right now, and what's going to happen in September, October. So the experts are predicting even if there is a second wave, we'll know how to handle it better, and it won't cause the same level of financial crisis as the complete shutdown. That basically we had to shut down everything, and I'm going to talk about how this is going to work out when we open back up. But when we have a partial reopening, we're going to have this implementation system of different areas that are going to have phased opening in different levels of opening and reopening. They're going to be based on whether the number of people testing positive in the area. So even if there is a second outbreak, so only one of these models, two of these models are predicting, getting almost back to normal by December and having almost no effect from a second critical wave, as where one model, just has a second wave, only having limited financial. Does that make sense to you? That so say if the view from the throne is even if there is a second wave that causes continuation of the death wave, that at that point it won't have a large effect on the economy or productivity.
Honestly, there's just too many unknowns to make a call about it right now.
Okay, well, it's okay. I mean, so this is, as obviously these are advisors of the elite in Belgium, and there's models all over the place. But so that's what I'm showing around the world. The different, McKinsey is actually, I guess, Irish in origin, but they're an elite firm that advises a lot of the big companies in America. So here is just models coming out of Belgium, but they have pretty interesting stuff. So I thought I'd show the Belgium, version to get an international perspective. So chief financial operators, what's your COVID-19 exit strategy? 49% believe operations could return to normal in 3 months if the crisis ends today. Only half of them. So half of people, the glass half empty, that half of chief financial operators think that even if COVID-19 ended today, we're not going to get back to normal. 70% are greatly concerned about the potential business impact of the crisis. There's immediate concern, flattening the curve, potential cash shortages, first response measures, exit strategy. So, I actually have a lot more information on this financial stuff. But we had to look at the current state and understand that the elites at least are projecting long-term effects of coronavirus to the financial strategy that they've developed to protect their wealth, considering that they believe this coronavirus will be a long-term pandemic.
Yeah, so another thing to look at is the fact that so many CEOs retired pretty recently. And there's also the impact of the lower price of crude oil, which cannot be overstated, really. So these CFOs are probably taking more into consideration than just COVID when they're giving those answers.
Yeah, I mean, the point, that's why there's a connection why they're going together, but to see for everybody, there's useful information. So, mentions crowdfunding, crowd lending, increasing these key factors. So I guess the rest of this is more their personal advice to their company and how they're advising their exact clients, which is interesting. They have a bunch of charts, but this is more the specific advice to their clients. So I just wanted to show those initial graphics. So do you want to do the vitamin C and D, and then I have 4 economic ones, or do you want to save the vitamin C and D for after the economic ones?
Might as well go through the economic ones now that we're on the subject. I don't know how much new information the vitamin C. I mean, it's not a very long one, I don't think.
Yeah, I thought I'd just throw that in there. Okay, so this one has a lot of pictures and slides, and actually some Israeli stuff. And this, like when I was like a Mitt Romney Republican, pro-Israel Jew, so to say, general leanings. I was never that political, but when I was in university and wanted to make a bunch of money, and general Zionist leanings, these are the type things that I saw all the time. You could say at the end of the day, capitalism rules, and you got to make money, you got to make a living, and you will get through coronavirus by a new device. There's going to be new technology, and if you come up with it in the device, and that's how you make your livelihood. So I'm very used to information being presented in this way. So Julie Wolf and Benjamin Joffe, I'm using your slides perhaps, so anyone watches this, maybe they'll invest in one of these gadgets or ideas. So SOSV is a early stage tech fund with $700 million investment, over 1,000 startups, about 150 a year, leading in life sciences. So some of these in their portfolio, this is probably an investor type. I've done a few of these presentations. I don't know if you've seen these, but these are usually presentations for either college students or investors, where they're trying to just give you an overview of possible investments, and then afterwards you would maybe have the chance to meet with the heads of these companies and consider investing in them. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with these slides besides for me showing them.
No, I haven't seen these.
Because it's common in business schools and Jewish circles, investment circles, but it should be obvious. So just your mindset might not like thinking this way, but from that's business school, that's the fact, that's the economy operates. And when you're in business school, there's no shame. This is just how you present it. So cost, timing, scale, prevention, testing, treatment, to opportunity to make money. 3D printing parts, form labs, print at home. Form labs, you could do in one printing 200 plus swabs, and swabs at one point have been costing like $20 a pop, but probably now they've gone down to much less. In the international supply chain, 3D printing has been a technology. I've been following people more on Facebook. Some videos from the conferences I've shown 3D printer technology, but breakdown of the global supply chain, and for medical devices, a lot of times the best way to produce medical devices is 3D printing, as opposed to plastic mold injection or a subtractive form of manufacture. So you can make mask fitters, all these various things that are 3D printed, and new 3D printers, technology, very interesting thing. Nanofiber masks, 3D printed, very interesting. You know much about 3D printing?
Yeah, actually, I was looking into it for a while because I wanted to 3D print some of my quantum mechanical periodic tables. Absolutely fascinating industry. I don't think it's quite reached the point where you can get a great product for a reasonable price, but it is definitely going in that direction. So it'll be interesting to see where that market saturates.
I might buy one in the next year or two. When I could get when you get a decent one that's not too much programming, for like $1,000, $2,000. Like right now, you could get one for $200, $300, or even like $500. Or if you're a little technological and could do a little putting together yourself. But like good ones that can make nice gadgets still cost a few $1,000s. This one's a fiber. It's actually a new material for whatever reason, different materials and masks. Here's like a little bracelet to prevent people from touching their face. I guess would give them some sort of warning that like your hand is moving closer to your face. To robotics, people who know Duvid's channel know I love robotics, and I was going to the local robotics trade shows that aren't unfortunately. We'll see. A lot of the shows would be coming up in the next month or two, so we'll see if any of those end up going on. But robots. I have by my parents' house a Sharky robotic floor cleaner. It's okay. Needs a little bit of work. It gave me a little bit of understanding of artificial intelligence to see how poor these vacuum cleaners actually work. But to use them for disinfectants, and also talk about the certain element of the elite that is going to trust the machine, and basically trust our safety by turning our safety over to the machine. Disinfectants, so a lot of new technologies, more bathroom moppers, sprayers, various robotic disinfectors. So a lot of devices in the terms of robotics. I'm not sure where you're at or when you worked, if you were close enough to a strong financial technological center where you would have seen these type gadgets around. I mean, certainly when I go to these trade shows, there's usually a lot of these gadgets on the floor, and various companies are demonstrating them. And when I was active member in Engineering Society Detroit, and going on tours, a lot of places affiliated with University of Michigan that have large financial backing, would also have devices like these. I'm not sure, what if you go to offices or places that have these kind of latest computerized robotic gadgets.
Oh, not that sort. The advanced computers I got the good luck of seeing were all stationary, not too much moving around.
So this one's pretty cool. Here's glasses. I've in construction, there's a lot of these devices manufactured like for heat loss in houses, where you could have a sensor and you hold it up to like a site and you could see where heat loss is. But for this point would be a sensor to see if someone has a fever and hence might possibly be more likely to be COVID-19 infected. And then like police or whatever would be able to have these thermal scanners for the purpose of detection of COVID-19. It's pretty interesting. That could also be artificial intelligence, facial recognition type thing. So besides for facial recognition, you could turn that over the computer to try to thermally check people for fevers. So I thought you might find that pretty interesting. Here's the phone booth style coronavirus test center. And I guess you've been in a place safe enough where you haven't seen test centers, but in Detroit, we got test centers set up. Here's one in Hebrew and Israel. Just the style where the scientist, the worker, and a lot of these are actually ran by the same National Guard that are now doing riot control in city. But if the National Guard or clinician, whatever, would be on the safe side of the booth, and then they would stick their hands through, that and perform the swab type test. And I know, Jennifer said, at least in some labs, like in physics or something, you're used to working with these type things that, for whatever reason, if you have gases or need to maintain pressures or working with dangerous chemicals, that most universities or laboratories have these type things. But now because of COVID-19, they've made these like boxes to have these to safely test people on street corners. So, and this is actually, this is a for-profit venture. So what I'm showing you right here are actually, like this is this is like, like this is an investment opportunity. COVID-19, like phone booth checking boxes. Any comment?
Yeah, it's peak capitalism right there, David.
Yeah, get your COVID-19.
Come on down, ladies and gentlemen.
But I thought you'd still, I mean, even though you might not like the blatant capitalism behind it,
no. I think it's interesting because I think it's important to learn new things. So I do appreciate the tutorial in this philosophy.
Well, you see that the majority of the testing in the U.S. is commercial. So I mean, at the end of the day, that's how the U.S. works. So if we need testing stations, it's going to be, like some Israeli startup or something, or that Korean Jewish partnership to make a phone booth testing center. And then, a bunch of municipalities will be like, we need testing centers. And there's going to be some company that will get the contract. And, someone will make millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's the current model. So
that's the American dream, isn't it? Making $100 million.
That's actually the global model.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm saying any country around the world that eventually gets stations like that will come and benefit an entrepreneurial. So it's saying if you're just a do-gooder who wants to do something, you could come up with an idea, but like practically, like no, what you need is phone booths, testing booths, where people could stand safely in them and reach through this and give people swabs and do the test without contracting the disease. And some company someone's going to come up with the idea, get a patent on it, and raise millions of dollars, maybe tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to manufacture thousands and thousands, maybe tens of thousands of these phone booth testing centers, and then they'll put them up for sale. And if it turns out that COVID-19 goes for a year or two and they need hundreds of thousands of these things, the person, could become one of the richest people in the world. Should it turn out that there's a cure to COVID-19 tomorrow and they never need these, like a few investors will lose a few $1 million. But as of now, that's how basically the whole world works, even though not every country is capitalistic. In terms of entrepreneurship, almost all entrepreneurship and new inventions like this are coming out of capitalist countries. And even if they don't come out of capitalist countries, they will, even if it comes out of China or something like that, or a non-capitalistic country, it will reach the rest of the world in a capitalistic manner, meaning that you're going to have to pay for it and you're going to have to seek vendors and sign a contract. And the dude who's selling it to you is getting rich off of it because, he predicted that, great idea, phone booth, COVID testing center things. I bet they're going to sell hundreds of thousands of it. So, pretty interesting. So let's look at a few more devices. Smart ring for pre-symptom detection, temperature, sleep, heart activity, various things. You see a lot. I've been studying this for a few years. A lot of these external monitoring devices have been around for a few years, but you see the rapid acceleration of technology implementation. That could be people be more likely to use these type devices, breathing monitors. Are you familiar with these type of apps and monitors that people could use to monitor basically anything remotely, and then that information could be fed into some sort of central database?
Oh, very interesting. Looks like they've had an upgrade on the old stethoscope, eh?
Yeah, and I'm not just talking about like your phone app or something, but like like a ring around your finger could actually monitor quite a bit of information. Let alone okay, so here we're still quite a few slides. So we're actually talking about drugs. So here, this investment opportunity is saying that look into repurposing old drugs, kind of like hydroxychloroquine. Repurposing old drugs is sleep apnea machines, I guess, related to oxygen. That sleep apnea is very common. My parents have machines. A lot of people have machines. Some people use them every night. Some people just have them. It's related to obesity. but connection between ventilators and these regular sleep apnea. I'm not sure, where you're located or your area, the prevalence of sleep apnea machines around you.
It's not something I'm aware of, but yeah, is it something that gets worse with age? This sleep apnea thing?
It's largely caused by obesity and
Okay.
and made worse by age, but I mean, it's just difficulty breathing when sleeping or difficult sleeping, and probably because a person's too heavy to sleep on their side, that they have to sleep on their back, and because they have so much weight that it becomes difficult to breathe sleeping on their back with the excess weight that they're carrying. And so in America, where 25-30% of people are obese, and obesity increases with age because usually people have more resources with age. The amount of elderly people in America using like sleep apnea machines might be like 25%. So I'm not exactly sure how this is relating to ventilators. So just for a business opportunity outcome, you're looking at the connection between ventilators or repurposing ventilators to sleep apnea machines to ventilators, so it's possible. So I'm not sure if they actually have a solution to that already marketable. So it could be this is already a marketable device that converts a sleep apnea machine into a ventilator. I'm not sure. That'd be my guess. I mean, there's a link on the bottom, ventilatorsos.com, if anyone cares. But it's interesting. A lot of physics and pressure type thing for these breathing machines. Single patient isolation and transport system. It's an interesting device to kind of just put someone in a bubble so that they could be safely transported. Saying from the economic model. So if you're the COVID-19 moving forward, that you think you're going to need a lot of these safety transport devices. So the capitalists have already, came up with them, and they're ready to pump them out when the mass markets are ready to buy these things. So, pretty interesting. Emotions monitor. Some of these are just not directly connected to COVID. I guess they just included it in there. So reinventing social infrastructure with technology. Another one, Choka Ventures. Anyone watching COVID that wants to invest large sums of money? I'm sure you could look into these. So you got silicon photonics diagnostic technology, FDA approved already. Genolite. This is a COVID-19 serology testing developed. So well, hopefully we'll talk about this more, what the difference between the serology and the different forms of testing. But these are more rapid result testing that look for like antibodies, and I guess from a blood sample. And this one could even do 250,000 patients a month, and could maybe even up to 7.5 million patients a month. So with the likelihood that there's going to need to be huge amounts of testing done, companies like Genolite have already created these machines, and and investors have already invested in these companies, thinking that it's likely that maybe people are going to need to order thousands or even hundreds of thousands of these machines across the world. Luminostics, proprietary nanoparticle technology. I thought you'd enjoy this one, Jennifer. Did you look at this one earlier?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how creative people are.
Yeah, and I mean, for the capitalistic model type purpose, and this is a marketable device that's already ready for sale, of a just a nanoparticle sensor that you could attach to your iPhone, that be connected to possibly serology, that you could even detect viruses. Well, I'm not sure. The price, you have to go to the webpage to see price range, or whether it's an idea that isn't working yet and they're looking for money to invest in the idea, or if it's something that they actually have a working model of.
It's hard to tell sometimes. A lot of these presentations end up being mostly wishful thinking, trying to get government grants.
Well, yeah, I mean, saying if maybe government grants, but I'm saying if they're looking for a private investor, most people who are good investors know how to do their due diligence and their research, So mental health and more. Okay, so that was pretty interesting. I thought people would, Jennifer, get a kick out of seeing some of these new devices.
Well, the idea to transform the sleep apnea machine into a ventilator is an interesting one because it can't be that different because they're essentially performing the same function. Just I guess the sleep apnea machine probably only kicks on if it detects a problem, I'm guessing. So that may actually work better than some of the ventilators, which I think were causing some problems because they weren't calibrated properly for some patients.
I tried to, have those conversations with Gandalf, but because I took classes in business school or maybe just being affiliated with Israel and entrepreneurialism, yeah, I was very familiar with these way of looking at it, but it's at least good to understand it from the economic point of view and saying at the end of the day, you need an economically viable product that is capable of being sold. So from the scientific perspective of understanding the idea to producing an actual marketable product, saying that's I'm an engineer. Jennifer is more on the scientist side and more on the engineering side. So, obviously products are made by scientists and engineers in combination, and then they're usually distributed to the general public through business people. And so you have these things where scientists, produce some device, and then they have to team up with business people to get the money to do that, and then to spread it. And it's an interesting subject, entrepreneurialism. I've talked about it before. We could do whole streams on it. And just so in relation to new products related to COVID-19, there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of more potential ones, and a lot of them are things that have been around for a while that just might now become popular in like early adoption. People like Duvid who are into technology and into early adoption, as opposed to other people are now, they don't really care. They're just looking for the best way to get through COVID-19. And at this point, we'll try technologies. So let's look at another related thing, the impact of COVID-19 on corporate innovation. So the executive summary, where was this from? So there's innovation at AirPlus International, head of product development, Mario Zorn. So appreciate his slides. In our personal networks, we have heard many different stories of how corporate innovation has been affected by COVID-19, ranging from no impact at all to huge impact. That's why we have started to do this research to understand better what is happening in corporate innovation and collaboratively learn from it. Digging deeper into the data, we find remarkable insights that are worthy topics for exploration and discussion amongst innovation leaders and beyond. In brief, if we look at the impact on size of internal innovation teams, we find that impact seems to be more pronounced in listed companies compared to non-listed companies, and that impact is greater in companies with more than 10,000 employees. Zooming in, we find that financials and the energy sector report a bigger impact compared to other sectors, while the technology industry is least affected. Innovation activities focused on IoT, AI, and blockchain reported lower impact. Interesting, we see companies with large innovation portfolio report less impact on the budget for innovation and facilitation compared to companies with smaller innovation portfolios. On the question, how is your engagement with internal, external startups affected by COVID-19? Almost 70% of the respondents that report a very large impact mentioned that a reduction in the activity is the main impact. That contrasts with 6% of respondents who report an increase in activity. So it goes on, encourage people to read it. Let's look at some of the graphics. So impact on the way you engage with startups. See. Other respondents, COVID-19 adjusted plans for 2020, slightly over 50% reported decreased investment budget, 20% see their budget cut by half, 40% of the participating companies report no adjustment to their 2020 budget. Cost cutting and openness to innovation are the biggest challenges reported by innovation leaders. So risk aversion, collaboration, motivation, team spirit, but open and less open to need for innovation is the biggest challenge. Speeding up transformation and need innovation are reported as the biggest opportunities. Like I've said, that rapid technology acceptance could come from the COVID crisis that would actually drive more innovation. So 83% of companies in the energy sector report a very large impact of COVID-19 on the way they engage in internal and external startups. Obviously, people are using less energy, so there's less of a drive when people are using tons of energy to invest in research. Sustainability also, although you look at blockchain and AI, very small, and even AI is possibly having increases. So activities in Sweden report very large impact COVID-19 on their investment budget for internal external startups. So here we're looking at mostly Northern European countries. So there's a lot of data here. I'm not sure if I'm going to go through it all because there's a lot of slides, but it's just interesting to see, related to the other one, how people are looking at innovation and how much they're investing or percentage of their efforts at this point in the time to go to innovation. And I got the one on AI, which one of the better ones. This one's really interesting. So here you got AI in the COVID-19 pandemic. It's from Trian Tran of Deakin University in China, which is no surprise that these best information on AI and COVID is coming out of China. So little, AI past, present, and future, 90s till today, deep learning, handwriting, voice recognition, bots, to coming soon, home and service, or here now, home and service robots, self-driving vehicles, data scientist in a box. In the next 20 years, man-machine collaboration, neuromorphic computing, brain-computer interfaces, future, quantum computing, emotional robots. So AI, what's it going to do for COVID? Predicting, filling in missing slots, optimize, discover hidden patterns, phenotyping, discover complex relationships, imitate humans in the plan action sequence for long-term rewards, reason about the world. Little famous meme, saying now that the temptation is deep learning. The experts looking at deep knowledge, and see if the biomed tech is thinking of going away from deep knowledge to deep learning.
Well, there are some times where the AI is way more accurate than the knowledgeable expert. That's exactly what it was like in the field I was in. It's a tough pill to swallow. I wouldn't say everything is everything falls under that umbrella, but some things do. There are some things computers are better at than we are.
Well, there's a lot of them. He's saying chess. Once the computers became better than man at chess, in general, the expectation is computers will become better than man at basically everything over time if it's conceivable to replicate it. So as of now, you say like radiology is the first hit of artificial intelligence, that the machine learning algorithms are much better at predicting the correct medical diagnostics from radiology scans than trained radiologists. So that's been around for a few years. And, so you say, okay, are we going to eliminate radiologists? Do the radiologists work in combination with the computer? Are we going to need less radiologists? So it's, but that's probably the most common, well-known case within medicine today is the power of AI algorithms to read radiology images better than doctors. And that's kind of like, chess, where at some point it was better than the best doctor. So, already in the 80s, there were chess computers that could play, but it took till, almost, 20 years, 30 years till it eventually beat the best player in the world. So the same thing to recognizing patterns to now the AI algorithms are recognized to perform even better than the very best doctors. So, but
yeah, anything with the finite series of computations involved, the computer will eventually do better. Once we get to a point where we're actually modeling it correctly, so long as what it is that you're modeling can in fact be modeled by a finite series of steps, the computer will always be of calculable steps, mind you. The computer will always be better in
and
theory.
also producing metadata from data, which is really a big focus of Week in Review and the collaboration of me and Jennifer, meta-analysis. But the ability to take data and produce metadata, they would say that actually AI is better at it than humans, or possibly, and it's a different, what does metadata mean? And that, we talk about regularly in Week in Review, but related to COVID, say health data is doubling every 2 to 3 months. It's a huge market, 13 billion, over the next few years. So what's COVID-19 new challenges? Healthcare system needs to respond fast and effectively, but cannot collapse from overloading. Meaning to say, we need the healthcare system to do better than it's ever needed to do before, and we can't let it collapse from overloading. So accelerating scientific discovery on virus treatment and vaccine, so that we want to produce a vaccine in 12 to 18 months, even though it usually takes 10 to 15 years. Enforcement of social distancing, forecast and modeling for planning, cases, inpatients, deaths, ventilators, other health resources, early warning of new outbreak regions, assurance of ethical concerns, and privacy. These are all areas of AI. So AI accelerated biomedical sciences. So basically you're saying we're not going to be able to get this vaccine faster of all the scientists. Maybe we could turn it over to the computer in a certain way, interesting, or various models. Or just various things that we could just hand over to the computer to meet our current need of accelerating need, mitigating.
That will run up into a problem because the way the computer models the the vaccine is not understood by us. So you need the computer to figure that out somehow. So you need to be able to program it in such a way, basically black box it, such that you could infer what was the predictive coefficients. And for that, you need a lot of data, but you don't just need a lot of data, you need a lot of verified data, i.e. is the data actually telling you what you think it's telling you? It's not as straightforward as it sounds, because as we said, there's this comorbidity issue, as well as this false positive issue incentivized by the Gibbsocracy.
Yes, I mean, but the point that they're stressing here is because we're in an emergency situation, it's likely we're just going to, and because the AI is developing at the time, that they're going to turn some of it over to AI because the medical system is already being stressed, and how much and what we'll do, we'll see. So we're looking at end game solutions here. What Jennifer was mentioning, simulations. Vaccine development, the computer models for multi-physics platforms, or molecular biology models that would actually have some sort of simulated model of whether a vaccine would work or not before they'd actually develop it, which is a much time consuming process, saying that why make all these vaccines and test them if you could have at least enough of an indication of what paths are going to be fruitful or fruitless from in computer simulation. But Jennifer mentioned is that we don't really understand why the computer says this one's going to work or that one's going to fail. We might be able to garner certain information from it, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like JF and his revolutionary phenotype. You're going to have to put some sort of blind trust to the computer AI algorithm that if the computer says so, you're probably better off following the advice of the computer in terms. So it's going to be an extremely interesting topic moving forward, and we'll talk more about it on Week in Review. I just wanted to mention it here with these slides.
Yeah, if I could just real quick explain how exactly it works because it's not that straightforward how what I'm calling black boxing works, and this is a big issue conceptually, but basically if you have enough data where you know its truth value. So the data that I had to look at in my line of work was, the question was, is this speaker A the same as speaker B? And so we had a bunch of data, like reams of data of people who just like got paid, to make phone calls with people and say, well, this is me talking on this line and this is me talking on, or someone else talking on that line. And so they knew the truth value. And then they took all this data and they said to a computer, okay, basically do every calculation within a certain family of computations, perform every possible version of the computations. Don't just do one, do every single one. And then come back and tell me which one of those, by random chance, quote unquote, happened to be predictive, i.e., which one correlates with a higher number when it is the same speaker and a lower number when it's not. And you keep doing that over and over and over again, and you start pruning all the ones that are giving you the wrong answers. And by doing that, you're just keeping the ones that are predictive. And if you eventually feed that enough data, you're going to get a steady state where adding new data doesn't actually change the accuracy of what you're getting out. So it's not 100% accuracy, but it's maximized accuracy within a particular set of parameters, i.e. that which the scientists placed in the beginning. It's like, how are we going to parse this signal up? How are we going to collate the data? What are we going to measure in the data? Because it's a sound signal. So you're probably going to be looking at some type of Fourier transform. And that, theoretically, that approach could work for everything. It's just that you need to have a lot of data, basically, because how many, basically, it's sort of an idea of how much independent information exists within the system you're trying to, how many degrees of independent information exist within the system under consideration. And we don't even have estimates for that with regards to the human body, because we haven't really scratched the surface of how these various things work, right? Like, how does the immune response work? Well, I mean, we know it works, but how exactly is it working? How complex is that exchange? That's where there's still a lot of big question marks. And until we can at least estimate that semi-accurately and get enough data that we know the truth value beforehand, this black box, which is what makes AI and I forgot. Sorry, I forgot the name of it is escaping me right now. It'll come to me later.
Machine learning.
It's another word for that. I think it's maybe deep learning, but it's that makes this approach so beneficial, because you're essentially removing a certain element of human subjectivity. You're saying, well, let's just let the data tell us what's right. Let's let the computer do every calculation, and we'll just strip away the ones that happen to not match up with what we already knew was true about the data. So yeah, thanks for listening, and that's all I had to say on that.
Yeah, so here you have a whole bunch of things that are likely to be, calling action areas related to COVID-19, and how AI would overlap with them: robot deployment, rapid treatment, vaccine development, early warning, social distancing, home isolation, quarantine, mental health, information, personal actions, collective decisions, education and finance, corresponding to computer vision, natural language processing, reinforcement learning, time series, interpretable learning, reasoning, causality, transfer, continuing lifelong learning, uncertainty, quantification, unsupervised learning, structured data, knowledge-driven machine learning. And here you see applications of AI already in the COVID pandemic. Early warning at the end of 2019 from Blue Dot, chatbots, patient triaging, medical records analysis, optimizing clinical trials, alerting of close physical contacts, fast image-based diagnostics, robots to deliver to patients, drug discovery, distance monitoring, information filtering, detecting fake news, enforcement of safety rules and compliance, like washing hands for more than 20 seconds. Some example in China. So here's a nice chart that kind of relates to somewhat what Jennifer was talking about. Here's your typical process of drug discovery from the old human model drug discovery versus how AI-driven process. The old model of you're taking 12 to 15 years to target identification, target, say, construction and screening, target validation, and then the phase 1, 2, and 3 trials, which really take 15 years. versus an AI type model that might be able to collapse that into 10 to a year, would be using computer models for the majority of these stages. And so I encourage people to look at the slides if you want to try to see what all these things say. So AI has played a limited role in this COVID pandemic, only in some areas. So does it say what areas? Okay, so here's saying after the pandemic, AI in health will accelerate forecast of needs of medical resources and the response time, like logistics in general. But just a lot of this technology and AI already exists. They'll probably just be applied to logistics for medical resources and scheduling and response time, optimizing logistics, warehousing, accelerating vaccine and drug discovery, detecting and warning early of future outbreaks, care and support for mental health, information and data sharing globally. So he's saying all these, how did we miss it? How did we miss it? Say the computer is less likely to miss it than we are. So AI is changing, better objectives, balancing between importance and urgency, less historic data, self-aware of its own limitations, that the AI is better interactions with humans, the possibility to respect privacy, fairness, responsibility, put humans first, align with human values. So AI, so it's pretty interesting. I'm glad I was able to find this and include it in the COVID-19 and see the role of AI in COVID-19, especially understanding the drug process that usually takes 10 to 15 years, and it's largely being collapsed due to advances in technology, specifically artificial intelligence, machine learning. Okay, so
Yeah, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So we'll definitely be seeing some interesting developments in this field going forward.
yeah, so let me go back to I'll save these two slideshows for the end. So I got two more slideshows, and actually I have some slideshows on this one too. But so here's some of the best information. We'll go to the kind of reopening stage now. How do we reopen? How do you know how to reopen? So here's the guidelines from the Center for Disease Control, and kind of like tools to help you decide should you reopen. Local orders, how to assess how much risk you're at, monitoring phases. So here is the guidelines from the Center for Disease Control. Here is the Kaiser Family Foundation. They have some interesting studies. If let's put that link in the chat too. Anyone who's familiar with health in the U.S. Knows Kaiser. So I'm not going to read through those just for time. Oh, that one was a good one. It's related. So here is Michigan has divided itself into 8 different regions and has risk phases of 1 to 6, which is related to growth. And right now we're assessed at medium risk and might be going to low risk. I'm in this area of Detroit, Oakland County specifically. If you're looking at, they're looking at a certain number of test results versus cases versus hospital capacity. So they have a certain metric to determine your risk level based on the percentage of positive tests, how many people are being tested daily, number, it's a whole bunch of metrics that determine what's the level of risk. And then within the categories of risk, the permitted and forbidden activities. So the risk category is constantly changing based on the number of positive tests and the different control measures that are implemented. And then the activities that are allowed or not allowed are determined by the level of risk level. So I'm not sure if you've been following up, Jennifer, this makes sense to you. This is the typical pattern that most places around the world are using to determine how you open or reopen by what they're calling risk levels and forbidden and allowed activities based on the risk level. So here's the actual 15-page document, the whole United States, like I showed. I think the CDC page and New York and various states. But here's the the Michigan one. It's in Michigan, so I'll just give an example. I'm going to show slides from Ohio also, our famous, infamous that woman from Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Whitmer. So here you have the 6 stages: uncontrolled growth, persistent spread, flattening, improving, containing, post-pandemic. So here we're in the improving phase. Cases, hospitalizations, and death are clearly declining. You're safer at home. And you could do some retail limited capacity activity. And versus the containing, where continued case and death rate improvements and outbreaks can be quickly contained, where the numbers have gone down to such a level where there's at most low tens of new cases, or even less than 10, or single digits, or no new cases. And maybe we'll talk about what's happening in Israel right now, or some of the places that are looking and reopening in this, how you could go back and forth between these various ones, where you might be on 3, go 4 to 5, and then if you get more cases, you would go back down, and you would have certain levels of restrictions back and forth. So this is the model that is being recommended basically across the board. And I'm not sure where you're at, Jennifer, if you want to discuss that. But I'm assuming that basically everywhere in the world has these kind of models of risk level and what's going to be allowed and not allowed based on these various risk levels.
Yeah, it does appear that at least the prominent role for AI for right now is at the triage level, is just like the basic framework for what level of protocols are going, and then people basically take it from there.
Okay, take care, Jim and Rainier, if you're signing up. Appreciate you joining for a period. So let's look at these quick graphics from McKinsey, just to get a little more data there. So I'm going to save some of the best for last. So let me just clear some of this last stuff I had. So here, McKinsey, a nice interactive about market valuation of industries. So you're looking banks down 25%, aerospace, air travel, oil, gas, versus high tech is up, healthcare distributions up, pharmaceuticals are up, media is up, medical technology. So it's just an interesting infographic, and you could adjust that by date and region. I think it was this infographic. This is just a generic global spread of COVID. Here is vulnerable U.S. jobs. So it's interesting. We've seen a lot of these. Just food services. So encourage people to look at these. The geography of vulnerable jobs. Saying like food services and various things. You could look at per region, and then racial connections to the vulnerability of jobs that, God forbid, probably we can review tomorrow. Maybe if Jennifer's energy after we finished all, we could talk a little bit about, the race relations and the mass protests. But you see that economic impact of coronavirus is more likely to negatively affect African Americans. And actually have more information on that. Here's another McKinsey study that will talk about the long-term effect of COVID on African Americans, and also the long-term effect on education. So it's a 9-page report. I guess that's too big for me to put the link in the chat. But McKinsey, COVID-19 student learning in the United States, the hurt could last a lifetime. So maybe a different time. McKinsey has a whole study where basically they're saying racial inequality is bad for U.S. economics, and that we need to close the racial inequality gap in order to increase our gross domestic product productivity level. That's the opinion of McKinsey. That might not be agreed upon in various levels. So here are 3 different scenarios of students at risk and how long we're out. So right now we're in June of this year. And what happens if we return to school in Labor Day, September, like we usually do, or if it gets delayed another year. So it could be the elite students are actually going to have a better education after this from the model looking at this, but the most at-risk students really risk substantial learning loss. And I guess they have some sort of number, NWEA RIT score, which I didn't have enough time to look into how that's calculated. But you could see here that overall you're going to have severe impact from the decrease in education, that a few months of people went by with decreased education, and that's going to disproportionately affect people of color in America, and the various scenarios for how much it's going to affect them, and then the economic impact of that educational effect upon the people that they've lost on education. And it's a McKinsey, the karma's money, and to try to convert that to a dollar amount, because this is McKinsey and we're giving economic advice. So here they're going to try to use the best of the laws of economics to convert these factors into a dollar amount to assess the damage. So I thought that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably going to pop the so-called education bubble in the United States. We haven't really talked about that very much, but it's certainly fitting the profile of a bubble. What's going on in the education industry in the United States, deregulatory schools and many private schools with very little accountability.
Yeah. Okay, so just trying to do something there. It didn't work. Okay, so this was an interesting Boston consulting group, and actually was very impressed with the way they put this out. So let's look at this real quick, and then they have a slideshow also. So 3 paths to the future, and this is pretty interesting and a culmination of a lot of the stuff we've been talking to, and then the last one, we have a long one that has a whole bunch of nice graphics that we could hopefully put this all back into. So 3 paths to the future from the Boston Consulting Group, rolled in transition, characterize the recovery from the coronavirus into 3 phases: flatten, fight, and future. Future will not arrive until a vaccine or people's natural health resistance creates herd immunity. Fight phase, 3 broad strategies for fighting coronavirus and restarting the economy have emerged: crush and contain, flatten and fight, and sustain and support. So let's see if I get this nice and big. So here is objective: crush and contain, full containment to reduce the number of local coronavirus cases. Extremely stringent intervention. Possible examples: China, New Zealand, South Korea, and Taiwan. Flatten and fight. Strong interventions to decrease the number of coronavirus cases and avoid overwhelming the healthcare system's capability, like Brazil, Germany, Italy, Nigeria, UK, and the US. Sustain and support with moderate interventions and primary reliance on voluntary restraint to limit the number of coronavirus cases until herd immunity is achieved or a vaccine cure is developed, like Sweden. So in a chart example where South Korea acted swiftly and effectively contained the coronavirus through mass restrictions, to the U.S. flattening the curve to Sweden with very little action, just voluntary control. So, encourage people, if they want to read through this. Here's a low positive test rates, fewer new cases, various metrics for doing it. So this same group produced wonderful slides. So let's look at these slides. In the chat, still holding on to 8 viewers. Appreciate you guys still tuning in. Hope this information's useful and saying, like, useful to me. Hopefully it's useful to Jennifer. Think about it, how to advise people and to control ourselves. So here's some very good slides from the BCG Boston Consulting Group. Okay, so it's global crisis. Leaders need to drive an integrated response. So here's their what they said: flatten, fight, future. Through disease progression, government policies, economic scenarios, business engagement and response, public engagement in response. So the executive summary: governments are actively responding to the societal crisis that is threatening lives and livelihood, need to further prepare for the new reality. So guide for leaders. So look at different economic impact at various countries, indicators, these new dashboard, cool technologies that we're seeing pop up all over the place. We've been showing you all night. A societal crisis threatening lives, livelihood, and the well-being of the global community. 3% global decline in GDP. Unemployment could be 20 to 46%. Structural starvation, poverty aggregation, domestic violence. Governments across the country racing to respond to untold human suffering. Stimulus packages unprecedented, dwarfed the global financial crisis of 2008. Talking, the U.S. 12.9% of our GDP, Canada 12% of their GDP. Stimulus package, UK 20% of their GDP, $500 billion stimulus package. Germany 37% of their GDP. Italy almost 50% of their GDP. Japan almost 50% of their GDP stimulus needed to fight coronavirus. So over $10 trillion already versus an average of 14% of GDP for COVID, as opposed to the global financial crisis of 2008 that only had 4% of GDP. So in terms of relations to these protests and uprising global things, the current state of the global pandemic is really unprecedented from many past tragedies, probably in most of our lifetimes. Going back to World War II, that we're in that. This tragedy is extremely significant according to many ways. So what's this have to do?
Yeah, quantitative easing appears to be the new normal, doesn't it?
Yeah, we'll see the effects of that. Could be drastic on a global level.
Oh, absolutely. It's unprecedented, and I look forward to discussing all that stuff, possibly in greater detail on Week in Review.
Yeah. So the fight is enhance social and economic resilience, build and strengthen capabilities for the future, deploy equitable, forward-looking financial support. So we've already flattened the curve. Like, this is 3 months now. We're entering out of, we've been in lockdown for almost 3 months. And, like tomorrow, Hare Krishna, hope to stream live outdoor celebrations for the Hare Krishna temple, first time in months. But we're in the fight phase where we have to, fight to get our society back now that we've flattened the curve, and also the possibility that there's going to be sustained high levels of death for the foreseeable future. But, still, even with this sustained high levels of death that coronavirus is coming, we still have to get our economy and get back to work. So almost all countries accelerate social protection initiatives. Continued efforts are necessary. Over 1,000 measures in 188 countries. $570 billion pledged. 55% of measures are new benefits or programs recently deployed by government. So all new high levels of government assistance programs that have never been seen before, like in the U.S. stimulus package, months of unemployment, benefits that have never been given before in the history of the world. Look at health, basic needs, income security. I did the stream on UBI, and actually interesting. The Jack Dorsey from Twitter is also going to be supporting large amounts of UBI with his charity, probably in the Oakland area. But the possible things that might come from it for a different, related skill mismatch could cost $18 trillion. That there's just this huge skill mismatch between what's needed and who's available and locations, and to try to quantify this in terms of a dollar amount to assess the problem, and then to graphically, I'm not sure if you could make anything out of this graph here.
Well, it's a little bit small, but yeah, pretty impressive dollar amounts there. Crazy amounts of spending.
Yeah, so building capacity, counter-cyclical investment required. So we discussed that at a different time, but there's a lot of good information here from a deep level of what financially, economically is required to get through what's going on. Possibly could be good for the level of transparency. Branding type thing. So it's an update, epidemic progression and impact. Case doubling rate improves, so that we're going up linearly now. So now they say the doubling rate is down to almost a month. And then it's geographically earlier. So you could say in America, the doubling rate is, although we have millions of people, so a doubling rate of a month means next month there's going to be another 2 million infections, and that could be, all new high def levels too, God forbid. But there's other countries that now have 3-day doubling, like the U.S. had before, and a month of that, and they could be at levels of hundreds of thousands of infections quickly. So here's a number of daily cases. Not sure if their count has it somehow decreasing with other ones. They just only have certain countries. So there's a decline in the major countries. Right now we're having decline in the number of daily cases, although they're very high. We've seen this in other, the increase is coming from largely Latin America right now. And here's your kind of levels of restrictions related to it, where, going back in March, the green is minimum restrictions and the red is maximum restrictions. And you could see the places that were green, like Sweden, that only implemented very mild restrictions. South Korea possibly has lifted restrictions, but besides for South Korea, most places that put in restrictions have not lifted them. Germany's having a gradual release to a lot of their restrictions released. But like I showed on an earlier one, that most of the places that have put in restrictions still have them and are probably likely to have them going forward for possibly the next year. And so here on the right, you have current status of measurements implemented by the government, which is going to come into these phases of lockdown. So different countries, different states or areas are going to set up their phases differently. And they have 3 phases, 5 phases, 10 phases. But they're all going to have some sort of system of phases of how many cases are coming, and that being directly related to what you can and can't do. So here is more graphical representations of daily cases compared to restrictions, and kind of this fight stage that we're in to can we get out of the future. And so here, economic forecasts point towards severe downturn in 2020, rebound of global GDP not expected before 2021. And the U.S., so you can see these forecasts. Europe is going to be hit much worse than the U.S. Or the U.S., India, everyone's getting hit in 2020. Some places harder than others. 2021, everyone is expected to be back in the green. Different sectors are different, though. Not all sectors are expected to return to the red, and we've discussed that in the past and many different times. But these are very good graphics. Governments face different starting points. Stimulus response. So you see, per capita GDP, interest rates, debt to GDP, versus revenue per sector. So interesting economic factors that are worthy of more research. The links in the chat. So I'm encouraging people to look more into this. Stimulus breakdowns. You see, guaranteed. So this is interesting. It's important. It might be beyond the scope of this, but you're looking at the what are they? Grants, wage subsidy, fiscal relief, income. So it's a nice color-coded pattern versus guarantees. So Germany is giving mostly guarantees, as opposed to the U.S. is mostly giving away money, and France is also doing mostly guarantees. Italy guarantees, as where the UK is also is doing loans. So relatively the U.S., Australia have been more generous in just giving away money, not borrowing it, not doing guarantees. So there's more links on this in the chat. So anyone who enjoyed that one, there's more to do. So I'm down to 3 presentations left. Anything to add, Jennifer? You having fun?
Yeah, it's great. I don't have anything to add for now. I'm enjoying just listening.
Okay, so here's the vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin D relate to the pandemic. I know we mentioned that in the first one, and now we have this guy actually had a bunch of slides on here. So I found whoever this Nupar Garg had a bunch of slides on a whole bunch of things. So global pandemic spreading, most of us may get the infection at some point. Individual actions that minimize the infection risk and modulate the severity of the clinical course are crucial. Diet and nutrition, huge issue. Vitamin C. I'm not going to do the basics of vitamin C, but how does it impact immunity? It's an antitoxin activity, inflammation. Your vitamin C is just a general thing that is useful for the immune system. There's studies, the effectiveness of vitamin C preventing and relieving the symptoms of virus-reduced respiratory infections. Going back, not specifically on the coronavirus, but tests going back, have shown vitamin C to be beneficial in fighting virus, not like a cure, but beneficial. Common cold, more studies. Shortened cold by 18% to reduced 8 to 14%. So I'm not saying it cures it, but it helps, and it's been tested too. And encourage people to read more. Vitamin D. Encourage people to study this on their own, but that it could reduce risk of influenza and COVID-19 infections through pro-inflammatory cyclotines that produce the inflammation, suppressing cytokine storm. So different evidence, physiology, studies that are likely. So, do you want to take a supplement? How much? Zinc is another essential microingredient. It's part of the 3 of the hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and zinc of the Jewish doctor Zelenko that encouraged Trump to take that. But he, not just hydroxychloroquine, but hydroxychloroquine together with azithromycin and zinc. But why zinc? Because studies show that zinc appears to shorten the symptoms and duration of the common cold. So there's been studies on this, and there's actually been studies that have shown that zinc in combination with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin have produced better results. Certainly hydroxychloroquine on its own, but hydroxychloroquine mixed with zinc. So interesting things, and there's some studies on that. I thought I'd include it. If you're a vegetarian, vitamin D, you can get it from certain types, mushrooms, or eggs, orange juice, tofu, yogurt, milk. So like I have a lot of tofu, milk, orange juice, any of these things. Good source of vitamin D, vitamin C. You see, lemons, lime, Brussels sprouts, all sorts of fruits, vegetables, broccoli. Also sources of zinc, kidney beans, cashews, okra. I'm a big okra fan. I have okra in my fridge. So you're just basic health advice, strengthening your immune system. Did you have any comment on the vitamin C, D, and zinc?
No, it's interesting, and I think I did talk about this a little bit at some stage. How they're very good for preventative, and zinc I think is good when you have it, because it accelerates the speed at which it helps mediate some type of transition. I forget exactly what it is right now, but it is involved with the immune response.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 slideshows left. So let's do this one on reopening. And Ohio had a pretty good one. So, Michigan's one, unfortunately, wasn't that good. And Ohio's been generally doing better than Michigan at fighting coronavirus, better numbers. So here's I guess they had a whole bunch of slides on restarting. Here's kind of like plans for nursing home testing. Did I get the wrong one? So this one's, I guess, specifically about nursing homes, but it has a lot of basic information. So getting back to work, you're going to possibly, face coverings. Hare Krishna temple tomorrow. It's outside, maximum 100 people at a time. Mandatory face coverings, but say face covering, daily health assessments, hygiene, cleaning and sanitizing, limited capacities, social distancing. So this is, things going up. Nursing homes are one of the biggest dead spots in the whole country. So how we open up nursing homes is, going to be one of the most strict of all reopenings. So whatever they're doing in nursing homes, presumably is going to be more than people have to do in other environments, but, good study case. So testing strategy to reopen, there's different numbers in the case of it, but you have to have an extremely good testing strategy to what they call contact tracing, where so few people have the coronavirus, where someone tests positive that you could contact trace and see anyone who's been around the person and test them. And, so Israel right now had tried to reopen, the people are testing positive and they're putting in quarantine, and they don't quite have enough tests to do, contact tracing where, if there's a school and one person in the school has it and they have to put everyone in quarantine, if they could have rapid testing and, just test everybody at the school and, put people in quarantine based on that. So these ideas of testing are unclear yet. See South Korea, New Zealand beat it kind of just by being in the middle of nowhere and limiting travel there, and anyone who comes to the country has to go through quarantine. To South Korea through using huge amounts of tests, or Qatar. So Ohio is trying to set up this testing regime to be able to open up immediately and keep people the most safe possible, and that's going to be common among the country. So I'm not going to read most of this, but just interesting information that everybody in their various areas opening up. So there's scheduling and planning to the different forms and the bureaucracy, to planning like a testing day, to when the testing comes, who does the testing, how the results are done and receives it, to the what's done after, contact tracing, interview of the person who's been tested positive, contact the contacts, asked about the symptoms. If symptomatic, make sure they have access to resources so that they can self-isolate, connected with community resources, follow the contacts until quarantine or isolation period ends. Visitation, saying for my grandmother's assisted living, you can't visit her now, due to coronavirus fears. So there's a lot of stuff here, the information gowns, and if people working there. So this is going to be important moving forward, how we're going to open. Nursing homes are probably one of the most difficult places to reopen, and see places of work or whatever in business will probably have less restrictions than nursing homes. So it's an interesting slideshow. Anyone who really wants information, it's in the chat. So finally down to the last one, almost 3 hours, a lot of information. I appreciate Jennifer sticking through with me. Did you have time to look at this last one about these in the UK numbers matter, coronavirus in the UK and US?
Sure, let's do it. It'll be interesting to see where that's going, because I think they've been the hardest hit, other than China.
Yeah, and this, I thought you'd enjoy, and I sent this to her before the show if she had a chance to look at it. It's from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries of the UK. So it's a lot of nice graphs, a specialist think tank on the impact of longevity on society. Maximizing the benefits of longevity, longer lives for everybody, whatever their organization that put together these numbers. Appreciate they did a lot of nice graphics. So you kind of see like the bending of the curves. In terms of the daily deaths in the various countries, and this is a logarithmic scales, because you see the U.S. is really more than twice as high as the U.K., but here it's a logarithmic scale. Okay, so there's so many numbers. Which numbers matter, and reproduction rate, and all these various things. Case fatality rate. CFR, infection fatality rate, mortality rate. So people who know numbers and statistics and actuarial, I take courses in actuarial. I consider being an actuary scientist. This is interesting. JF has talked a lot about this. I think JF is wrong. I mean, he's right that he's probably, to some extent, to compare it to the common cold, but I think the data appears, from this, you'll see the excess deaths in the UK to this date that are likely related to coronavirus, and you can see the percentage, really just a huge percentage of excess deaths. So when I looked at the Jeffrey Epstein Harvard sponsored model, you saw these SEER and SEER models, maybe some of it susceptible, exposed, infectious, removed, to various things to put into these models. Looking at the comparative sources of data. So here you have daily ICU admissions and deaths. So ICU admissions was the concern, flattening the curve in terms of not having more ICU admissions than ICUs available. And from that perspective, the curve has largely been flattened. And was it R value removed, or is that replication rate? So I guess the R value here is how many people get infected from each person becoming infected, and that number appears to be below 1, which is good, and that means that the number of cases would eventually go to 0 if R stays below 1. Comorbidities, trying to graph together various things. Geographical risk, obviously London, South London, the cities, connections to urban density. So you can see, huge number of cases related to more dense areas. Age, sex, and ethnicity. Obviously, older males are dying and infected at a much larger rate. And and England has a smaller, probably black population, but you see even in England, whites are being affected at a smaller rate than the percentage of the population. Whites of England, if I say, make 78% of the population and only 67% of the, I'm not sure if that's just one municipality in London. So I'm not going to go through every single page, but there's a lot of data. I'm not sure, did you look through any of this in advance?
Not in any significant detail, no.
Yeah, so there's multiple presentations here. So standardized mortality rates. So this kind of stuff JF's talking about, where you're looking at your just mortality rates in general, and then you're looking at the trend of mortality rates related to COVID-19. And JF claims that it's not substantially higher, and here it appears to be saying that it is substantially higher, the mortality rates this year as opposed to other years. If reduction.
I think what he was drawing attention to is the drop off in viral pneumonia from all other cases, from all other sources. Because the common
point somewhat. He might have just been using hyperbole and overstating his point, but I mean, he is making a point that should be made. And I guess there's inequality among the number of years people live has been decreasing. And possibly that trend will reverse because of COVID-19, that there'll be a return to higher inequality of lifetime lived, like the Gini index, as people call it sometimes. Expectancy of financial crisis related to health and life expectancy. So you're seeing that there's a strong correlation between financial success and length of life, and that could be growing and could already be signs that COVID-19 is going to exacerbate that. Just interesting trends. And then if you look at international comparisons, see US and UK right up there with actually the US. This is one of the charts where even though the US has a large amount of deaths, that US is actually faring better than most countries in Europe. And President Trump always makes that comment, and that's like this chart that he's probably Trump is mentioning. Variations within areas that sometimes there's explanations, but US all over the world, there's some explainable, some unexplainable. Could be chance, could be scientists over a period of time will come up with better explanations for why certain areas are getting hit harder than other areas. So as I said, there's a lot of data. People have their theories. Likely the computer will come up with better determinations of what could be derived from the data than human theoreticians over time. Relationship between distance to job, exposure to disease. He's like nurses, obviously, high exposure, care workers to other professions that might have very low exposure to, here you have security guards. In the UK, close to 200,000 of them that earn an average of £10 an hour. Very few females. And so just, more information to get a better understanding, more data. Age-adjusted rates of lab-confirmed COVID-19. So you see Black African Americans suffering at substantially higher rates, which, hopefully moving on as COVID-19 moves into the background, and maybe these racial relationships and protests and criminal justice reform will move more into the foreground, that these we'll see the relationship between these and talk about these in the future. Here is one of these death rates. So here you have going into just the increased age standardized death rate per 100,000 people, vastly increased. Certainly among old people, where from about 700 people to well over 1,000 in April. And relationship to poverty, that the people who are closer to poverty had a substantial higher increase in the death rate. And here's really to ethnicity and sex more. So why are these COVID outcomes not uniform? Population density, travel hub, social obedience, type of work, and who's going to be affected if they do, pre-existing conditions, age profile, lifestyle risk factors, poor health come from catching a disease to needing hospital treatment to needing ICU to, God forbid, dying. So, you noticed a chart that connected Jewish populations to COVID centers, but, Jewish populations are probably correlated to other factors that are correlated to COVID, like international passenger footprint density. So, these have relatively been well demonstrated. So here's more charts on numbers matter from Morningstar Consulting. What happens next in the US and UK? So here's some good graphics. Here you could kind of see US daily new cases, flattening of the curve in the US at around 25,000 daily new cases. And, can we expect tens of thousands of daily new cases for the duration of the summer? Look at the various places, Alabama. These are places that, we look at these treatment paths, to testing. So percent change in personal consumption expenditures, dental services down 61%. Maybe dentists are slowly going to be reopened. I was just watching the CDC before this today preparation. I watched the CDC guidelines for dental opening. So we'll see how dentist offices are going to slowly be able to reopen. Right now they could perform certain services. I'm not sure if cleanings and regular things are how they're going to do it. Physician services, hospitals, private insurers report sharp drops in utilization April 2020 relative to last year. So insurance companies saying that people didn't go to doctors that much in April unless they had COVID. Primary knee replacement down 99%. Lumbar thoracic spinal fusion. So these are the top 10 inpatient procedures in surgery. God forbid, knee replacement, and saying that they just got rid of, delayed all knee replacements, hip replacements down 80%. And these are common things because usually older people with better health care need these at some point. As people get older, eventually they might need one of these procedures, and older people have better health care, more money, more likely to, something like a hip replacement. But you see certain things like mechanical ventilation has actually increased. C-section, I don't know if it's related to pregnancy. Why that would have increased, I'm not sure. But, almost a fracture repair. Not sure if there's less injuries or people, we'll see. Cataracts, other common surgeries, sleep apnea. And my mother finally was able to see her sleep doctor recently after a few months. But, all these various things of people that usually see doctors for these things, and you see the percentage decreases. Coming months, a lot of people looking forward to seeing a dentist, attending gathering more than 10 people, just getting a haircut. You see Duvid needs a haircut, going back to restaurants.
You'll get the haircut first, then go to the restaurant, right?
Well, I don't care about that, but No, I mean, no. I mean, it's going to work out the opposite. That restaurants are opening before haircuts. Haircuts aren't going to open till June 15th here in Michigan, and then I'll probably be busy, so I'll probably have to wait another 2 or 3 weeks for a haircut.
Oh, geez, what a shame.
So here's change in demand. Decrease in primary care, emergency room, lab service, elective surgeries, but an increase in telemedicine, mental health, and substance abuse. And on the other side of the curve, there's going to be the increase in those things that had pent up demand built up over the lockdown. Kind of obvious. Downstream effects, reduction in accidents, injuries, reduced pollution, but lack of chronic condition management, behavioral health, blood donation, income loss, various things. So just okay here. So here's mortality rates per 100,000 people, and you could see here is where you see the U.S. doing relatively good compared to Europe. Is these mortality rates over 85? So this would be like 0.05% of people over 85 died. But in the UK, over 0.1% of people over 85 died. And then you see the nursing homes was a big tragedy, but it's saying that not all old people are in nursing homes, like a minority of them are. But you see the U.S. relatively fared better in terms of mortality, deaths per percentage of population than even Germany and France and Belgium. So here's the graph of JF likes to mention weekly flu, pneumonia, COVID-19 deaths by selected flu seasons. So I guess this week ending here, you have different years of flu seasons. These weeks from 0 to 51 means the week on the calendar year. So you have 2009, different years, and then COVID-19 to have a number of deaths per week. And COVID-19 in the U.S. to bring up to 20,000 deaths per week, and even in the worst flu season, you never get to 10,000. Rarely does it cross 5,000. So I'm not exactly sure what JF was saying, but according to this graph, it seems very clear that COVID-19 was significantly worse than any seasonal flu by at least 2 or 3-fold. But maybe that was only JF's point, that it wasn't substantially worse than a flu. It's still within the realm of a flu, not a pandemic, that it's only 2 or 3 times higher. It's not like 100 times higher.
Yeah, the diagram he was referencing looked a little bit different. So either they're looking at different numbers, or the original diagram was somehow misrepresenting the facts. Because I'm not really sure where that diagram actually came from. I never saw it in an official source.
You had a few different diagrams, but they looked at just Italy. I'm not sure. My point's not to argue with JF, but so the consensus among the elites disagrees with him. But here's the numbers. So I thought I'd show that. So here you have hospitalizations and outcomes with discharged and deaths from male and female and age groups. Health insurance. So you see a lot of Medicare, which is for older people, Medicaid for poor people, and commercial for everyone else. And so the majority of COVID-19 patients in the New York City area was paid for by the government. Natural disasters, connected Michigan, we just had a flood, tornado, hail, possible connection to natural disasters. Actuarial process, because this was slides from Actuarial Society. So look for discontinuities, heuristics, rules of thumbs may no longer work. use first principles for strategic planning, asset problems, defaults, long-term low interest rates, previous bets to pick up, yield liquidity, various risk assessments. So I think this is the last one. So what happened that may impact retirement and security risks? So this is all words. I'll let people read through that on their own if they're interested. Okay, so covered a lot of material there, over 3 hours of material. Did you just want to call it a night and talk for week in review, or is there anything you want to add?
Thanks a lot for having me on the show. Thanks for taking the time to find these slides and articles, and I look forward to the show tomorrow. Thanks again, everyone, for watching.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for joining. I appreciate you coming in and some insight. And as I think it was worth doing, just for my own educational purposes, or even if me and Jennifer were just internet study partners. But hopefully this will be useful to other people. And the video, we kept it basically purely to COVID-19. I'll add in the timestamps hopefully tomorrow, the next day, so people will be able to access it, and the links, and moving forward, you'll see like there's a lot of new issues to talk about. So I wanted to kind of at least get an update. We hadn't streamed on coronavirus, this huge important topic, in 2 months, and it's not going away. And so I wanted people to have the best of the information I could find available, and people, me and Jennifer, that care about limiting suffering and like to be able to advise people on how to limit their suffering and to have maximal benefit from their rare birth in human form. So hopefully we'll serve that purpose. And tomorrow, see, I haven't been out in a while. Hare Krishna temple, Sanan Rath Yatra, they could take out Lord Jagannath deities and pour milk on them or something like that. Social distancing, chanting, these. So got to get back to normal. And so it'll be the first time I chanted in months. Maybe I'll be able to live stream. We'll see what happens. I'll ask my dad before I do it, just to make sure he doesn't recommend against me doing it. My dad, the doctor, just to, but so I assume, week in review, we'll keep on mentioning COVID-19, but likely we're going to move on to different topics. And we got a lot of interesting things to put out there, but we wanted to do this public information session because COVID-19 probably, maybe the George Floyd protest or racial situations more important right now. But COVID-19 is probably still definitely, if not the most impending important issue facing people, one of them. So we're glad to provide that educational opportunity. And every Sunday on Church of Entropy's channel, usually around 8 o'clock, maybe later tomorrow if I'm celebrating in Detroit, but I'll be live streaming. So hopefully, we'll continue developing some of our other theories and scientific theories and applying it to topics of the day. So have a good night, everybody, and really appreciate Jennifer helping out with this stream, El Jim in the chat, Reiner, anyone joining the chat, appreciate that. Leave comments and video if you want, and stay tuned for more. So have a great night, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks.